The boss on a beautiful, is it a fall day or summer day? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to September 22nd, 2021 Executive Committee meeting. We acknowledge that we are on traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. To ensure social distancing measures are being met during this time, some members of City Administration are attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I would like to remind those who are attending through video conferencing of the following. Please ensure that your video camera and microphone are turned off. If a member of City Council wishes to speak, there might be one, but everyone is in house. Use the raised hand function to be placed in a queue for speaking. When speaking, remember to unmute your microphone and enable your video camera, and all votes will be conducted with a recorded vote. Could I have someone to move a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Hawkins. I'll call question. Anyone opposes? Is Councillor Moll there? No? Councillor Moll there. Okay, that's carried. If I can have someone to move a motion to approve a meeting minutes from the Executive Committee from September 8th, please. Councillor Sonichuk, thank you. Any errors or omissions? I'll call the question. Anyone opposes? That is carried. Thank you. Is John away? Okay. Okay, we have delegation in regards to the EX 21-60.
Good morning.
Mr. Onda, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Can you introduce yourself for the record? Who you represent, if any, and where you're calling from. And you will have 5 minutes. Afterwards, Executive Committee will have, I have questions. Go ahead.
My name is Stephen Onda. I've been developing affordable and supportive housing in our city of Regina for the last dozen years. And within the last 5 or 6, I've done over 200 of them. Half of them supported by the city.
Did we lose you?
I don't think so, but here, let me...
Yeah, go ahead.
Hang on, let me try something else here. Hi, my name is Stephen Honda. I'm currently representing a single-purpose entity called Bright Sky Home, which is a supportive housing initiative that's proposed currently. Hello?
Mr. Onda, you go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you. Continue.
So my understanding is how this process works is I'll simply read the presentation that we submitted a few days ago. Would that be appropriate?
Go ahead. Yeah. You've got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
So we appreciate this opportunity. We want to make it short. We know we have a long agenda. Our interest is in brownfield. We build in the inner city and in established subdivisions, largely affordable and or supportive housing. I just mentioned that we've built several hundred, or not several, slightly more than 200 housing units. Most have full-time support services. Why we are asking to intervene is that we have a few concerns. I'll leave them to the end of my thing. We salute the city. We know that we are a small city, and we understand that we have very old infrastructure, extremely old. And we need to find a way to address that and service agreement fees, SAFs, and the other, whatever it defined, do need to come into play. So we totally agree. I had asked the question in my presentation, pre-presentation, would these fees cover costs of upgrading? As I reviewed the information, I found out, and by speaking with city planners, that no, this would not pay for the extra fire hydrant for intensification. So if I take a 6-unit townhouse and turn it to a 45-unit supportive housing, I have a completely different sanitary flow, water flow, fire suppression flow, on and on it goes. Electricity, which is not your worry, gas. So when we go brownfield, we're not just tapping into something nice and green. We're tapping into 75-year-old cast iron, and can become quite expensive. If we only have to go a block or two, okay, we think so. So my first question is, to the end of my presentation, just give me a moment, what happens if I have to put in 10 blocks of sanitary lines, not 2, or water lines? What if I have to put in 3 fire hydrants, not 2? And then long-term, what happens if I only replace 2 blocks of cast iron sewer line, and 10 to 20 years from now, the 75-year-old currently aged infrastructure underground is going to fail at 85. It's shocking it's actually lasted this long. So I'm going to leave those questions. I'm just reading here, trying to truncate this. I think I've touched everything I need to. We are working with Phoenix Residential. We currently have a 45-unit Phoenix Residential on Halifax, so effectively it takes about a little less than $1,000 per person for the bricks and mortars of their housing, and at the most, not rudimentary, but appropriate, by my humble opinion, it takes $2,000 a month for supportive housing. So in closing, I'd like to thank, this is not part of your agenda, your call out to provide supportive housing to these NGOs. I'm not a service provider. I'm purely a facilitator. And then last question of the 3 I have is, looking at your newly, as on your agenda for today, the affordable housing survey, we need to find a way to get more money into the city. Service agreement fees is one. The other, of course, is property tax. However, in my case, when I'm building things that rent out at social services shelter allowance levels, which is less than $700 a unit, and I've been granted tax exemptions for 5 years, my observation for myself and any others who are trying to do this, YWCA, whomever, is that we're having trouble meeting the tax costs. It's horrible. And I'll end with, what's happening is, I'll use North American names. David works at the Buffet Palace. Mary works at as a part-time hotel cleaner at the Quality Inn, and they've been out of work. Well, they have a 3-year-old child. They've been out of work for a year. So what do? Kick them out? No. But we're not getting the income. So I don't know how to solve that, and I don't expect that one to be. I'm just asking questions. I don't think I'm asking for answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anda. I will turn over to the committee if anyone's got any questions for you, and there are. Just 1 second here. We got, will you come to Stevens? You, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Through the chair, Stephen, I just want to confirm a few things here, given what we're talking about. The first is you support in principle SAF fees and the intensification levy as a principle and as a policy. Is that correct?
Rhonda?
That is correct.
Okay.
Sure.
And again, to clarify, your issue with it isn't the fact that they exist, but that the money doesn't go far enough to cover the actual infrastructure costs and implications when you're intensifying. Is that correct?
It is. I'm such a terrible salesman. So our calculation on the next building, which coincidentally is 45 units on Toronto and 15th, or our next proposed building, I'm not really sure what's all under the ground, and we're going to have to find that out. And we've been speaking with the city as recently as yesterday, and the city's planning department has been very cooperative. But my thought is, I budgeted 230,000. I think I only need 210. I don't know if that's enough to address all the concerns. And in this project, the budgets are already set, so we can't change today. And what you're looking at is acceptable. But going forward, you may have to go and increase these fees.
Okay. And I guess another follow-up then, it would be your recommendation that instead of abandoning the intensification levy, we would instead evaluate the formula that brings us to the cost that you're paid, and that revenue from this source is invested in the infrastructure or actually mapping out the infrastructure so you know and other developers know what they're getting into. Is that correct?
Well, there's two questions. I missed that you were thinking about taking out the densification fee. I just presumed that it was the all gathered together. So I don't know how to answer that one. But I wouldn't take the intensification fee out. But when you get to the affordability ones, so if I'm going to put up a luxury condo, different than if I'm going to put up a hard-to-house, homeless, at risk of homeless facility. So I do think that you need to let me use the word designate, but that's not the word I want. Evaluate the difference of different build forms in the case of intensification. In the case of service fees, I think it just should be flat. Like 200,000. This is a $10 million project we're proposing, so 200,000 is a lot of money. But in the scheme of things, not so much. My worry is, what happens 10 years from now, or 20 years from now? Now, I'm in my mid-60s, so it'll be up to you guys to deal with it. It might be something to consider. Did I answer your question?
My final question, in your opinion, based on what you do and the type of housing you build, have the SAF fees prevented certain developments from taking place? Has it prohibited growth? Has it had any impact at all on your capacity to build supportive housing in Regina?
Well, this is all very new, as you know. The SAF is going kicked in shortly. The last build I did was 3 years ago, no SAF. We did have a contract zone agreement which was nullified when the zoning came in December. So we had a zoning agreement from last spring which didn't have any SAF. Not zoning agreement, sorry, contract zone agreement. And so no, this is my first one where we were actually had a line item called SAF. So no, not yet. No, we're fine. Smaller builds, this might be a real problem, and our build is not that big. We're not a high rise. We're a low rise, in General Hospital area. So I can't speak to all developers and all projects, but I would say no, SAF has not limited us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Anda, just for the record, I don't believe I heard you say, where are you calling from?
Well, you guys are going to hate me. I'm on a small lake out by Manitoba, but my principal residence is in Regina.
Enjoyed a few last days of the good weather. Thank you for
First
that.
day of fall. First day of fall, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And it's gorgeous in Regina, too. Just talk to my wife.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got one more. There's another questions coming. Councillor Brashani, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Honda, for taking the time to call when you're on your holiday. I just have a
Oh,
question.
no, I actually work from here.
Oh, okay,
But anyway,
even better.
yeah, so it's not just a holiday.
Even better.
I'm cleaning the bathroom.
Okay, so I have a question just in regards to what you've stated, and I just want to make sure that it's clear. So I have a question in regards when you did come to the city and you knew there was going to be, for the development, there was an intensification levy. Were you provided with what that intensification, the amount of what you were going to have to pay to put into your development? Did you actually get a dollar figure? Through the chair.
Actually, we've been working on this project for 2 years, and as recently as yesterday afternoon, no, sorry, it's Wednesday already, Monday afternoon, one of your senior planners, after a Zoom call, had sent me a breakdown calculation. I'm a little puzzled by it, but it's in part because we're at preliminary drawings and costing. So we're still working it through, but the city's been very cooperative, and it's actually 202,000 seems to be the number, based on the information I have, and I've budgeted a few $1,000s more in case we're wrong. If I'm wrong by 100,000, that might make a difference. So I'd have to answer, yes, we've had numbers, but we're in a very preliminary stage, and so I'm not holding anyone to the numbers that have been projected.
Thank you. In regards to, so you've been working on this project for 2 years, and you've only received the amount yesterday. How did you know that you could go ahead with your development if you only got the amount of the intensification levy yesterday? Through the chair.
Mr. Honda?
If I may, we had estimates a year ago. My comment was we're constantly refining what cost there might be. Everything from, because we're moving to a site that actually needs a discretionary use application, which our first site did not require, or did require discretionary use. We spent 8 months of calendar time working with planning commission and city council, and then unfortunately the landowner doubled the price because after 2 years the option ran out. We went to renew the option. The landowner, he hears 10 millions. He thinks it's a lot of money, and so he went from 620,000 to $1.2 million. And the project can't stand that kind of cost pressures. So I went looking around for some new land 2 months ago, and that's why we landed on 1222 Toronto Street, which abuts or is adjacent to the General Hospital. Has other challenges, not just sanitary and water. It's actually an ambulance corridor. So I've got to think through parking, and there's a lot of things that need to be considered here. So I'm sorry to mislead you. No, we are constantly being updated, and things are constantly changing, and so we want to work closely with everybody to make sure we do the right thing.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brashani. Anyone else from the committee?
Sounds like we're done.
Mr. Honda, just a minute. I don't see any further questions from the committee, so I appreciate you addressing the committee, and you may leave the meeting.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Hopkins, are you there?
Yep.
Good morning. Good morning, Ms. Hopkins. Introduce yourself for the record, organization you represent, and where you're calling from, please. And you'll have 5 minutes for your presentation. Afterwards, committee may have questions for you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Pandura. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day out there in the Queen City. My name is John Hopkins, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Regina and District Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today on behalf of our 1,250 members to provide our thoughts and perspectives on the tax policy and affordability report. I would like to begin my comments by stating that the question and issue are not entirely clear. What problem is this report addressing? And what are we talking about? $1 million cost, a $5 million cost, a $100 million cost? I'm not entirely sure. This is not to say that I don't understand the broad scope of what is being asked, affordability from a property tax and water utility perspective. So where are we in terms of affordability? Well, according to the 2019 City of Calgary property tax...
Mr. Hopkins, can I interrupt you? Are you speaking to the EX 2160? The City of Regina Development Charges and Fees?
No, the tax policy and affordability report.
Yeah, we've got, yeah. Okay,
Back
so
on hold?
I think we got you in the wrong spot. You're not speaking at the right report.
Okay.
So then we will call you when we
Okay.
look at the report.
Sounds good. I'll be here.
Just one second, Ms. Hopkins. Yeah. Okay, thank you then.
Thank you.
Okay. So we just need a moment to reach our next delegation.
I'll hang up. I'm going to call back.
Okay, so we don't have any. Okay. Mr. Niebogol, are you there?
I am.
Okay, thank you. Please introduce yourself for the record, an organization you represent, and you'll have 5 minutes for your presentation. Afterwards, maybe questions from the committee. Go ahead.
Excellent. Stu Niebergall, President and CEO of the Regina and Region Home Builders Association. We'd like to thank Diana Hallrick and Michelle Foreman and their team for their work and recommendation on the 2022 service agreement fee rate. The RRHBA believe the infrastructure project list on which the rate is based is accurate and the calculations have been completed properly. The process for calculating the rate has been fair, transparent, and aligns with the service agreement fee and development levy policy that was approved last spring. The industry appreciates administration providing the annual report on SAF projects and spending, and our association supports this recommendation by the city administration, and we encourage City Council to support the recommendation as well. And that's my presentation for today, and yeah, be glad to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niebogol. I'll just check with the committee. Any questions for the delegation? Okay, we've got one here. Okay, Councillor Hawkins, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Niebergall. Just with respect to the intensification levy, do you think that that levy discourages intensification projects, particularly in the downtown area?
Yeah, so we've been taking a very hard look at that subject matter, and as I've mentioned to some of the councillors, and we do have a paper that I had committed to come out at the end of summer. We're a couple of weeks of getting this out that speaks to some of these issues. But there's no doubt an intensification levy is any financial cost adds a barrier. But the reality is if we need infrastructure to go, someone has to pay, and if it's not the end user, i.e., the homeowner or the business that is establishing itself, then it's the taxpayer. Having said that, our belief is, as much as the intensification levy, can create a barrier, there's actually other barriers that are more significant to intensification than just the intensification levy. And so we'll be coming, back with recommendations around the ideas of pre-zoning, predetermining density, predetermining, the built form, and pre-servicing identifications, so that you can really create certainty for, the development industry in the intensification areas, that is more, a bigger roadblock that actually has to be addressed, before we're too concerned about the intensification levy.
One further question, Mr. Niebergall. Do you know of any other planning tools that could be used to mitigate the effect, to lessen the effect of the intensification levy?
Well, I think, again, at the end of the day, it takes us back to, the year 2007 when a form of these fees really first went into place, and the city took on the model that growth pays for growth. And the reality is that whether we're growing on in the inside of the city, or we're growing on the peripheral, or a combination of both, it requires more infrastructure, and that infrastructure comes at a cost. So the question is how does that infrastructure get paid for? And historically, through the building of cities right across North America, but including Regina, essentially cities were built on a bit of a pay-it-forward basis. And it was back then that we made this transition to a growth pays for growth model. And under this growth pays for growth model, our industry understands, doesn't always like it, but understands that we need to put this capital forward to be able to ensure the infrastructure is in place, so that the growth and the investment can actually happen. So coming back to our point on this, if one can create significant more certainty for investment, especially in the intensification areas, all of a sudden, the intensification levy itself, is manageable, right? The challenge is when you have a high level of uncertainty on on your investment, then add the intensification levy on top of that, the risks just become too great.
One last question, if I might, Mr. Chair. Is it possible that we can pay for intensification by the benefits that the intensification brings to future development, future residents in the city?
Mr. Niebergall?
That is a really great question. I don't know that I could give you an honest answer today without just rambling on. because I think that is a very big question to get addressed. Yes, there are ways of accomplishing that. It is figuring out what is palatable, from the city itself, and what's palatable from the from the industry, and can we find that sweet spot between those two places that that attracts investment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niebergall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor Masters, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Niebergall.
Hello.
In terms of the SAF fees, who pays for these?
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, the developer pays the initial cost here. But the way to think about this always is, at the end of the day, they're really project managers. They're really cash flow managers. So at the end of the day, the end user is ultimately the payer of these costs. So that is in the residential side, that is certainly the homeowner. It is certainly reflective in the price of the home.
And what's the area an SAF fee is charged over again? Give me the area.
Well, the service agreement fees are based on the greenfield side on a hectarage basis. So the 297,000, which is the recommendation, a developer would pay to that hectare, and then they would develop that the housing units around that and the street layouts, etc. And then the intensification levy itself is based on a per unit basis. So they are different systems that are all kind of grounded under what the Planning and Development Act does allow. I do think one thing that's not necessarily well understood, because you're seeing two different numbers. So for an example, on a single detached home, the intensification levy on that would be, the new rate would be 9,300. Then you've got this 297,000 per hectare. The difference between that unit cost, and again, this is a very rough number, on an intensification compared to a greenfield development, would be double of what it is, more than double of what it would be on a greenfield, the intensification side. So, that 9,300 for intensifying a single detached home, if you were to put one on a vacant lot out in the greenfield area, that would work out to more than $20,000. And why the difference in that cost? Very roughly, it probably is mostly consistent with just the extra transportation costs. In the roadways, etc., is probably the big difference there. The way the process works, and the calculations are made. Things like a sink or a toilet, for example, I always use that as an example. It really doesn't matter where the toilet is, whether it's in greenfield or whether it's in the intensification zone. The fact that we're adding another toilet to the capacity, it's that cost to support that has to be paid for.
Okay, so my simple math suggests that on 1 hectare I can fit about 160 dwellings. Is that fair?
No. That would be very, very high. Roughly on a hectare of land, you would be able to fit about 22, low density, about, at a very high density. So, apartments, as an example, units, you would be at about 65 per unit. And then when you look at that from a gross hectarage perspective, what the SAF is paid on, you've got about 40. That 65 turns into about 45. That 22 turns into about 15 units per hectare.
So 23 to 26, given our density requirements currently?
Yep, on a low density, yep.
Can you explain to me if we're looking at SAF fees per hectareage, and intensification is intended to build on existing infrastructure.
Yes.
Why an intensification levy itself is due on infill when there's new property taxes?
Yeah, so, I mean, the property taxes, again, my understanding of it, and it's really a great question to, I think you really want to push back to the administration as well. But, my understanding is really at the end of the day, the the property taxes really cover the operational side of the city's cost. Doesn't cover the capital cost of building the extra capacity. So, one of the misunderstandings out there, both by citizens and even by developers, is that there's this infrastructure under the ground and in place that the developer should be able to tap into. But the reality is that infrastructure, as Mr. Ronda had suggested, is old, and it's got limited capacity. And so really what you're paying for is the area-wide capacity, to be able to add that new infrastructure. And again, I go back to the example of toilets because it's the easiest way to explain it, is that the fact that, we're going to add over a period of time, say 50,000 more toilets to the infrastructure, the city needs to put more capacity in the overall capacity of the city's infrastructure to be able to accommodate that. I hope that's making some sense. It's complicated.
We'll get to that another place. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Did see no? The question was, okay, right on. Okay, anyone else from the committee? No? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Niebogo, for presenting, and you may leave the meeting. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we'll consider EX 21-60, the City of Regina Development Charges Annual Rate Review. Could I ask someone from administration, Ms. Harlach, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the report before you today is the Development Levy Annual Charges Rate Review. So the Development Levy policy was approved by Council in April. And as Mr. Niebergall had indicated, we go through a process where we look at the project lists together. We reevaluate them, and new information comes in, and the model, it all goes into the model, and then rates are put out at the end in terms of greenfield. And as Mr. Niebergall said, those are charged on a per hectare rate. And then the intensification levies are done at a per unit or a square meter, depending on the type of land use that's in question. And so these fees do fund the capital infrastructure requirements to support growth for our larger systems. We heard today the concerns about the on-site servicing, and to getting to that, that's another issue that's outside of this that we need to also address and work with the development industry on that. So the model is a 25-year model, and it gets reviewed, as I indicated, every year we sit down to go through that process. The one thing to note is there was through the process one of the projects that was in the model, and these projects are fed by the water master plan, the transportation master plan, and the wastewater master plan primarily. And one of the main projects that's changed from one of those master plans is the requirement for lining of the wastewater, I believe, and that made the intensification rate levy go up because of that project being 100% funded through the intensification levy. Each project is evaluated on the impacts in terms of the capacity needs to support infill or intensification area and what it would be for the greenfield, and that's why there's different splits. And so some projects are solely responsible, the responsibility of just is accounted for to the intensification, while the majority are to the greenfield SAF rate. And then again, then there's portions from those projects. So that's how it's looked at. And projects are determined of, would we need to do this project if there was no growth? And so that's kind of the question we ask ourselves when we're looking at the model and moving forward with that. So this model is governed under the Planning and Development Act of Saskatchewan. So there's only certain types of infrastructure that can go into this model. Different municipalities across Canada have different legislation that can allow different things. So for example, here in Saskatchewan, we can't include fire stations as an example, but in other jurisdictions you can. So this is primarily drainage, water, wastewater, and transportation projects. So we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Howlak. Can I have someone to move a report? Councilman Sinelli? Okay, I'll give you the floor if you would like to start.
Okay,
go ahead.
Thank you very much, through the chair. I'd say thank you for the report, but it's too much to digest, and I don't think I have, so at least you gave me some reading. The projects that make up the list, are those vetted on a regular basis? Do there ever projects that are decided aren't worth fulfilling, drop off the list to make room for more pertinent projects? Does that process go on?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, it's an iterative process. The projects that are in the project list, as I said, come from our master plans. And so a number of them are placeholders, which, as Mr. Niebergel said, we go through the project lists with them. And so we do have those. Some projects are placeholders because they're further out projects. The more that are in the 5-year capital plan, like those are definite. And so as we get more information on engineering studies, then those projects could change and evolve. We also look at the pricing that's coming in, like our estimates, and we also take into consideration construction costs when we're looking at the cost estimates. So a lot of the model is based on some assumptions, and then the higher level master plans that Mr. Onwright's area, the master plans that his area has produced, and the transportation master plan that my area has produced, because it's how to get to that. When you look at the master plans, it's kind of like the 80,000 foot level, and then you have to do that next layer of engineering and design work to determine the details. And so as we get that information, the model gets updated accordingly.
Okay. I think I understand the premise, but when I look at the application and when I'm representing what happens in the ward I represent, I notice a little bit of a juncture that causes a deviation in the problem. It's in terms of Courtney Street. It makes 2 different spots on the plan, both in column number 20 and also the flyover on number 21. Put together, they add approximately $14 million onto the fees. And in the 5 years I've been a councillor, it's been pretty evident that the chances of Courtney Street needing a north-south connection after we've developed Pinky Road and all the recent construction, it kind of impedes the neighborhood from becoming a complete neighborhood in terms of First Avenue North, the sidewalks, some of the connections there. And on top of that, it also puts pressure on funding for these SAF fees that are paid. First of all, if I'm misreading how this happens, or if I've misunderstood Courtney Street and the likelihood, I guess that's my own perception. But I was just wondering if you could provide some comment on that.
Sorry, could you give me the project numbers again?
Sure. Courtney Street Extension, Sherwood Drive to First Avenue North, west side, number 20. And Courtney Street flyover at CP Main Line, number 21. $3 million price tag on the first and $11 million on the second. And no infill, they're both SAF, sure.
Yes. So I can have, I'm just going to see who's the best person to speak to that. One thing that we are doing, I'll get someone to speak to those specific questions regarding those requirements. for those projects, but the transportation master plan is up for renewal. They get reviewed every 5 years, so this project list will get updated in addition when we're going through that plan. But I will ask, sorry, just trying to find who the best person is. Pardon me? This is transportation. Sorry, Ms. Lugner.
Okay, Ms. Lugner, go ahead.
Yes, through you, Chairman. So Courtney Street and Pinky Road are both identified for improvement through the Transportation Master Plan. The city had completed a study to look at what we should do with each of those particular sections of road. However, once the bypass was built and it was very close proximity to Pinky Road, the city will be limited to a 2-lane roadway on Pinky. So that will necessitate Courtney Street at some point. But the trigger for that will be sometime during the build out of Coopertown. So the existing development and the existing traffic, the Pinky Road project we have planned will accommodate that. But at some future point, we will need to do Courtney Street. So I can't give you an exact year when that will be triggered because it will be dependent upon the timing of development. So yeah, it still is part of the plan.
Okay. Just to lobby for a second and put it out there, traveling through the areas right now with that future date for Courtney Street, it's impeding sidewalk completion, any kind of pathway. It's impeding the completion of current neighborhoods, holding that space open for the future. And looking at the creek and how it deviates in the area, I'll be anxious to see how you guys reassess the situation and what you come forward with it. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Now we're going into Councillor Blankets. Go ahead.
Just a question of clarification, and that is that the fees spoken about in this report would be charged equally to non-profit housing providers as it would to for-profit. Is that right?
Ms. Orla, go ahead.
For you, Mr. Chairman. So currently that is correct. And we do have a report. So we brought a report to council regarding intensification incentives. There was a discussion paper that talked about where we would look at not requiring those fees and how to pay for them. And so council actually took that report and asked us to do some additional work around that and consultation. So we're doing that right now. It'll be done by the end of Q4. There'll be a survey out. Part of that was also to look at the market demands or why people want to move into the infill area or the intensification area and why they don't. And so all of that information is coming back in a report to council in Q2 of next year.
Thank you. And then the second clarification, and you'd mentioned this briefly, Ms. Harlock, but I'm just looking for more explanation is, and I'm at the end of page 6, beginning of page 7 of the report, and there it talks about essentially why the intensification levy is going up, but the development levy not. And as I read it, it's a particular capital project is sort of assigned to the IL, but not to the development levy. And so my question is just a bit more clarification on how we decide what capital projects should be attributed to the IL and affect that rate and what to the development or service agreement side.
Perfect.
Ms. Harlock, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, so it was a revised estimate with the wastewater master plan for the wastewater liner replacement project, and that cost was about $7.5 million. So that project is needed to support growth and development in the established area. So it was looked at as 100% funded to the IL. So I'll explain generally when we look at the projects again, and then for that specific project, I might ask Mr. Doney to speak to that. But we look at each project, as I said, and we say, what is needed to do growth in the intensification area and the greenfield area? And so if there's a requirement for both, then there's a split, and usually it's a 70-30 split. 30% is what the new population is supposed to be in the intensification area. So that's how we split it. And some projects like this one, it wouldn't be required except for the growth that would be taking place within the intensification area. That's what's triggering it. So we look at each project about the triggering and then which area benefits. So it's the benefits model is how we look at things. So again, there's the large project list that totals $700 and some million, $750 some million. And that's because there's sometimes a tax portion, like the taxpayer is going to benefit. So there's the 3 columns that we look at, and then the percentages are allocated. That's how the model is set up. So at the end of the day, we have the policy, and then the policy dictates how we evaluate that. So if we want to change the policy and have these fees, intensification project fees, we just need to figure out how to pay for that differently. And as we've heard, there's different ways to do that, and we're open to having those conversations with council. But I might ask Mr. Doney to talk specifically about that project.
Okay, Mr. Doney, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So just as Ms. Harlock has mentioned, that particular line item is required because those wastewater pipes need to be bigger if we are going to intensify in the area identified. So that's why they're allocated to the intensification levy, because they are only for areas of the existing city that would be needed to intensify, and so the wastewater pipes need to be bigger to accommodate that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's good. So, Bob, thank you very much. Where we go next? Councillor Hawkins, you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have several questions for the administration, and then I want to move a motion. The first question is, does the intensification levy discourage development, particularly in the inner city, that would increase property tax revenues to the city in the future?
Ms. Harlock, where are we going to?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, as we've heard, it can be a deterrent to development that could take place.
Thank you very much. The second question is this. Is the money raised through intensification levies, is that money used for intensification projects related to intensification?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. The fees that we collect go into the model, and so as I've indicated, there's different shares, whether it be greenfield intensification. So yes, all that money goes into paying for the greater system upgrades that are required. What Mr. Onda was talking about and what Mr. Niebergel was talking about is something different. Mr. Niebergel touched on it. There's site servicing to connect into that bigger system. So the local, if you can think of these projects as like the bigger system, and then there's localized systems. There's also an issue with the localized systems, and right now the developers pay for that, and that's part of the concerns that the development industry has, is understanding the localized systems. These fees go to the greater system, and so we are doing work on the localized systems as well to get that more information regarding those requirements as well.
So, Mr. Chair, if I understand administration's answer, there's not a dollar for dollar correspondence. The intensification levy fees goes into a bigger pot, which is then used for capital projects. Do I have that right?
Sarlach?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so we charge the rates, and yes, it goes into the servicing agreement fee model that has all of the projects.
Thank you. The third question I have, Mr. Chair, relates to different models that are available for thinking about these problems. Mr. Niebergel mentioned the pay it forward model. Can you tell me what that model's about?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So that's, I think what Mr. Niebergel was talking about with that one is where the municipality funds those infrastructure projects to advance those things. In the past, Mr. Niebergel is right. We've had servicing agreement fees for forever. It's back. I have a spreadsheet all the way back to the 70s of the different rates. The difference is how much does the municipality pay and upfront different types of infrastructure. And so over time, that's changed. And that just is a policy decision of council on what types of infrastructure you want to pay for and what you don't want to pay for. So lift stations are a good example. Right now, it is required by the developer in that area to pay for that themselves. We could put that in this model. It used to be in this model, but it got taken out, but it could go back in. Or us as a municipality could say, we're just going to build that infrastructure. So it's different policy decisions and decisions on what infrastructure we're going to pay for and what we're going to make others contribute to.
Thank you for that. Council, we in fact have two contradictory policy models on the table. One is the growth pays for growth policy model, which is of which this intensification levy is one. And the idea is that if you hook up into the system, you should pay your extra cost for hooking up into the system. However, this council, and maybe the last one to some extent, has developed a different set of policies, an environmental policy, which says we are to look at everything we do with an environmental overlay. And part of an environmental policy means that we have to take intensification seriously for a whole variety of good environmental reasons. There's a debate about whether we target that more explicitly. That's a different debate. But generally, in an environmental model, we should be concerned to increase intensification, particularly in areas like the inner city, where we could really benefit from greater density. So we've got these two policies, and what is being proposed here feeds directly into that contradiction, and as a result makes no sense. On the one sense, we're saying we need to raise intensification levies to increase capital improvements. On the other hand, we're actively discouraging intensification. There's just no doubt about it that if you charge these kinds of intensification rates, particularly as they're increasing, we're not going to get intensification. And that's part of the reason why our intensification statistics over the last few years have been terrible. In fact, the policy has been a failure. What I'd like to see is this section 2 of this report referred back to the administration, and the administration give us a serious look at what some policy options are which will undo this contradiction. As this stands, I can't support increasing intensification levy rates when I know that is going to drive intensification away from the city, and what's more, I know that that is going to decrease our ability to raise property tax revenues in the future. I, in fact, think these intensification levy rates are costing the city money when you take into account the opportunity costs of the future property revenues, which is driven away. So on that basis, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that Section 2 of this report be referred back to the administration to consider these matters. And the normal practice, Mr. Chair, is that everybody gets a chance to have discussion. So I'd be happy to, with your permission, to put this referral motion off until every councillor has had a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I was going to ask you that. That's possible. So I do have speakers, and then afterwards, you may proceed with your referral.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay. I believe Councillor Stevens, you up? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. As I remember this debate when this first came up, what was the trajectory of intensification and infill before these levies were put in place? Were we seeing growth, new intensification projects, new infill projects, and did this levy system stall it, or was it already plummeting when this came into policy?
Ms. Horlock, to you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So the trajectory was already going down with intensification. The cumulative average in 2014 was at 26.3%, but that was based on a couple big projects that year, and then it's just slowly gone down every year since. The rate went into effect 2018, I believe, and it's stayed the same average basically from 2018, 2019, and 2020.
Thank you. this is anecdotal, but I'll use an example. On 13th Avenue, there is a new apartment building. There is a new business. There's actually more development on 13th Avenue for a variety of reasons after these levies came into effect than before. Shouldn't these levies have stalled and actually just halted those projects in their entirety? Or is there something else at play?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's similar to what Mr. Niebergel said. We have our underutilized land strategy that council approved, and some of the things that we already know that are stopping it, and as Mr. Niebergel indicated, is when projects are going forward for intensification, it's going through the process for rezoning and getting the site ready for development for that intensification, and it's not always welcomed in the neighborhood. That's why Mr. Niebergel was indicating that those are the types of things that can help intensification move forward, is when you pre-zone sites. You've gone through that process so that that barrier and risk is gone, because developers will pay a lot of money to go through the process, and then if there's a lot of obviously concerns, they can lose the project. So that's one of the tools that they're asking, and we support that, and we're also working on that as well.
Okay. Through the chair, so just to be clear, what we're hearing from industry based on the consultation is the biggest obstacle: political uncertainty, infrastructure uncertainty, and the process. And that's based on my reading of the studies that you've produced in the first-hand accounts. Is that fair to say that those are the three biggest obstacles and not the levy per se?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, and then they will tell you, and you heard it from Mr. Niebergel today, that any costs can impact the viability of a project, but definitely it's the localized infrastructure and the certainty of whether or not the development can move forward.
And through the chair, is it possible to use revenue from the intensification levy, in fact, any of these service agreement fees, to actually fund research and infrastructure that would help to incentivize those areas?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, so yes, within the servicing agreement fees, the development industry funds administrative positions to do that work. It's just, where do we focus first? There's a lot of areas. So they have agreed to 4 positions to do that work.
Okay, and so through the chair, without the service agreement fee revenue or the intensification levy, that would just come from general operating expenses, correct? So we would fund it through property taxes, for the lack of a better word?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there's different there's different models on how to finance it, but yes, at the end of the day, it would have to be funded differently if we're not collecting it.
Okay.
It's just, we have all of these projects, they have to get done, and we just have to figure out how to pay for them.
Right, thank you. Through the chair, presuming that even if the referral motion goes ahead, and I think there's good reason for it, I presume, though, that the fee structure as it stands would still be in place. So I have a recommendation, perhaps it could be framed as an undertaking regarding a process. The biggest concern I've heard, in accordance with what Councillor LeBlanc has mentioned, is with the not-for-profits. As an undertaking, is it feasible for administration to harmonize the not-for-profit tax abatement application and other grants and incentives for not-for-profits with the development application? So one example is Circle Project. There was tens of thousands of dollars that have been added to the cost. I had to work through a bunch of emails to get all the appropriate paperwork. Is it possible just to harmonize the whole development application so not-for-profits know that there are incentives and tax relief for them to actually defer the cost? Is that possible to harmonize these processes?
Sola?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, that's something we can undertake. That was, we can advance that sooner. That was one of the undertakings for that larger report, was to see how we could do that, but we could definitely do that now. If the suspension, or pardon me, if the referral was to suspend the fees until the Q2 report comes back, then that would just mean nobody would pay, or the motion could be to suspend them for just for not-for-profits.
Okay, thank you. I guess to Councillor Hawkins, in terms of how this referral goes, would you be amenable to it just being wrapped into the existing research administration is doing about intensification, both the incentive side as well as the fee structure? So we'd have these reports come back simultaneously?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the problem with that is that today we're being asked to actually increase the intensification levy, which is an immediate further disincentive to intensification. So I'm very reluctant to delay this increase based on a report which I would hope would come more quickly. I think there's some urgency about this. So I think, Councillor Stevens, what I'd like to do is hear what other councillors have to say on this, but that's my concern. It's really a timing concern, and I think as a matter of priority, we have to deal with intensification levies.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Okay. Councillor Standichuk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where is my question? So are we just discussing the intensification levy right now, or also the SAFs? Just the intensification?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Let's go ahead and say that again.
I just wanted to make sure that my questions, because I have some questions regarding the SAF, and right there's.
Yeah. So you know what? Before we go any further, I'll get Mr. Clerk to. Where are you? Oh, sorry.
Should I hold off on that?
Yes.
Yeah, just a second.
Thank you.
Explain.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So Councillor Hawkins had indicated that he was going to remove a referral motion, but as per past practice, he was looking for comments. So what we are doing from a governance perspective here is the Deputy Clerk and I are treating this as if Councillor Hawkins is going to separate recommendation number 2.
Okay.
And we will deal with that ultimately as a referral. If it passes, then it will come out. If it was defeated, then it will go back to the comprehensive main motion. So you will have an opportunity to come back to the SAF portion of this.
Okay.
If that, I assume that meets with Councillor Hawkins' intention.
Yes, it does, unless the administration tells us that number 2 is so inextricably intertwined with the whole motion that it can't be severed in the way you suggest, but I imagine it can be severed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Okay, so Claire, I guess through the chair, I'd just like to ask a question of clarification. The motion to refer to the idea of pushing the discussion on the decision on intensification levy off. What would be the implications for the city at this time? Would we just be using the old intensification rate in the meantime until this a report comes back?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So there's a number of ways that council could do it. If Councillor Hawkins' motion is just to keep them at the rates today, and then a report comes back, that would be taking not this recommendation, leaving them as is. If it is to bring a report quickly to just look at intensifications and other ways to fund intensifications, then we can bring that report back. That would be different. And then, as I said, there's an option to just suspend them until the bigger report, which means nobody's paying them. But if it's a deal, I think what Councillor Hawkins is wanting is to sever this, have a report back to look at what other opportunities are there to not have an intensification levy and a different funding model, and I'd ask for clarification from Councillor Hawkins.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I would imagine that the intensification levy as it currently exists would remain in place, but I would also imagine that a report on this specific referral motion would come back to council very quickly as a priority matter. So I'm not suggesting a tax vacuum here. I'm suggesting that the current arrangement remain in place, but on the understanding that back before this council, we would have a report from the administration, which enables us to debate the problem of intensification levies in general. That's how I imagined it. But again, other councillors will have comments here, and I'd be interested in those. Very interested.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Most of my questions are regarding the SAF. I do. I mean, did listen to our delegations that seem to be in support of this. So I'm just going to, I'm not going to comment any further right now. I'll listen to others.
Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Masters, you next.
Thank you. I have some questions for administration. What's the growth been in the last 5 years in the intensification area? And specifically, let's focus on downtown in terms of dollars and people.
Ms. Howard?
Mr. Chairman, I might ask Mr. Grazier to go through those numbers.
Okay. Mr. Grazier, you there?
Yes, through Mr. Chairman. The cumulative rate since the adoption of the OCP and it being implemented in 2014 is 74 new residents to the city center.
Thank you very much. What was the target?
Through Mr. Chairman, the target over the lifespan of the OCP is 10,000 new residents to the city center over the whole lifespan.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, what's the lifespan?
Mr. Grazier, go ahead.
Through the chair, I believe the lifespan. Oops, sorry. Through the chair, I believe the lifespan is 25 years.
So from 2014, 25 years, so 2040. Have I got that correct? My math correct?
Okay,
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's to the population of 300,000.
Which was what date that was the target date for that?
We were hoping to have it within that time frame.
So 2040, am I correct with that number?
Yes.
So we're looking for 10,000 people, and in the first 7 years of a 25-year plan, we have 74.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
So if my math is correct, in order to actually, as opposed to 25 years, in order to achieve 10,000 people at this current trend rate, it would be 957 years to reach that target?
Ms. Howard?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if the continued trend takes place.
The intensification levy, as it continues to be explained to me, is for capacity growth in greater system upgrades. Have I got that correct?
Ms. Howard?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
And the cost of those upgrades, I've been told, is $125 million. Is that correct?
Ms. Howard?
That is.
So this policy is predicated on growth towards 10,000 people in 25 years, or actually what remains of that, 18 years? Is that correct?
Ms. Howard?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
So what if we have zero growth, or the current growth rate that we appear to have, which is well under, I don't know, what is that under? Well under 10%. But what if that trend line continues? Does that $125 million still have to be spent?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it becomes a financing issue for the cash flow of the model.
Based upon the information provided, I see that we have charged $1.6 million as of August 31st, collected $926,000. So in the 2 years, which again, it appears the intensification levy was brought in for the last 20 years of this growth model. And to Councillor Stevens' point, were we on a downward trend, or has intensification levy played into this a bit? That's really begs a bit of the question, but it would appear intensification levy collected has been $926,000 in roughly 2 years.
Ms. Howard?
Pardon me? Sorry, didn't.
Intensification levy collected, according to the information provided, has been $926,000 in 2 years.
Through the chairman, that's correct.
So even if I go to the amount, no intensification levy collected in 2 years, that's $500,000 per year?
Sarla?
Yes.
So in order to collect, even on that, let's presume that trend line doubles. Let's call it $1 million in a year. It would seem to me that we need 125 years to collect $125 million. Am I math right on this?
Sarla?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, we need to collect. And the money is, yes.
What do new property taxes pay for? Councillor Andrews spoke about, I don't know, there's a Sobeys liquor store that, while he may not want it, is ultimately very convenient. The new property taxes there, pick a number. Call it $100,000 in new property taxes in an intensification area. What do those new property taxes pay for? Because they weren't in the budget prior to being built.
Mr. Lacey, I think that's to you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the new property taxes basically pay for all of the services that the city provides residents, whether that be police, fire, garbage pickup, transit, maintenance of parks. So those new property taxes, just like all property taxes, would fund those items. Obviously, as new population growth occurs and new development occurs, some of those expenses I indicated see increased expenses. You've seen the police here before, and I think they have a phrase about cop per pop as an example. So as the population grows, more resources are required there. I would say overall, for me, it's really about balancing a ledger. I often talk about long-term financial viability. On the left-hand side, you have operating costs. You have costs with respect to renewing existing infrastructure. And then you have costs with respect to new infrastructure related to population growth. On the right-hand side of that ledger is about how you fund those costs on the left hand of the ledger, right? And that's a policy decision on how you go about doing that. At the end of the day, the ledgers have to balance to ensure you have long-term financial viability for the city of Regina.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that, Mr. Lacey. So two things. The first being, currently, I'll pick parks and maintenance. Actually, no, let's pick buses, because that's fun. Because currently, there's a bus driving down 13th Avenue already. So the addition of property taxes, by virtue of what you just said, should actually reduce the cost per unit of providing that service, because it's new, brand new revenue in an existing area. Would that be correct? We pay for that bus service currently right now. It's an existing service.
No, through you, Mr. Chair. I think that would be a reasonable assumption to make on that piece. I will come back and always talk about that ledger and the need to balance that ledger. And it's really about making policy decisions on how you think you should balance that ledger. So I do appreciate very much so that, on the intensification piece, certainly you're right, the overall taxes coming in that area and the load on that bus should result in a more efficient per passenger ride. I think I'll leave my comments there for now.
Thank you.
Mr. Lacey?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Second part you talked about. Balancing the ledger. Would you consider it prudent fiscal policy to budget for a 125-year collection of a bill that's due in the next 17 years?
Mr. Lacey?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to start, and then I might ask Ms. Howerluck just to add comment. So the model, as I understand it, is reviewed annually, and it is based on certain assumptions with respect to how fast population will grow and then what type of infrastructure is required in the city with respect to meeting that increased population in the city. If those assumptions aren't being met, i.e. you think you're going to do it by 2040, we're going to see 300,000, or we're going to see an intensification of 10,000 in the downtown core, and reality or actuals not tracking with your assumptions, you periodically should be going back and reviewing that model and making adjustments as necessary. And I'll maybe ask Ms. Howrluck to speak to that process a little bit more, how it impacts that list of projects and how it impacts the other side of the ledger, which is the funding side of that ledger.
Through Mr. Chairman. So yes, Mr. Lacey is right. The funding, the assumptions behind the model, we're continually needing to look at that, because the mayor is absolutely right. If the trajectory is the same and we're not collecting it, then there's a problem, right? Because we can't wait 125 years. We've got to build the infrastructure. And so we do look at those assumptions, and we would make changes to those assumptions as we go forward, which impacts the rates. So all of those things come together, and then it's about policy, as Mr. Lacey said, the ledger and policy choices. I think the one thing that I just want to clarify, because it's not, the mayor's right, in the downtown core area, we call it the city center core, we're looking for a 10,000 population, which is 5,000 on the, or 2,500 persons on the RRI lands. And then the downtown is 5,000, and then the rest, there's an additional 10,000 within the whole area. So it's actually an intensification of 20,000 people, but the mayor's correct, the 10 is what we're trying to target, and so we're not hitting those targets. And as we look at that, it's what do we have to adjust to start hitting those targets?
Thank you for those comments. Through you, Mr. Chair. You brought up population growth. We know it's been 74 net people since the OCP was brought into place. What's the population growth been in that same time frame outside of the intensification area?
Ms. Howrluck?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I might ask Mr. Grazier.
Okay.
Yes, through Mr. Chairman. So we have, I don't have the exact number, I can pull that up in a few minutes here, but I think just as a good comparison, again, just speaking cumulatively since the adoption of the OCP in 2014, we've seen 12.2% growth in our established area. So then just some quick math, that's, 88% greenfield growth during that time. But if you give me a few moments here, I can certainly pull up the exact number of population growth in greenfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grader. I have a concern with the donut. I have a concern with an intensification levy, which Mr. Holden and myself were able to do some industry consultation, and the feedback about this, what intensification levies are a deterrent for development, particularly the downtown warehouse business districts and industrial areas. They do not exist in Saskatoon or Edmonton, and in fact, the city of Calgary has incentivized people to the nth degree in order to fill up their downtown. Add costs that make development prohibitive and offloads future capacity needs onto singular projects that alternatively, if encouraged to proceed, would offer growth in property tax revenue, paying for capacity over time, and create desired infill projects. Intensification levies create barriers to improving worn out or dilapidated assets in our community, which results in a depleted tax base and a less vibrant, less aesthetic city. I'm going to give you an example, and I'll finish up, I promise, Mr. Chair. Get off my soapbox. We have an example of a project in terms of we want some of that brownfield area in our city center core filled in. We have an example of a project. And it's $1 million project. The intensification levy on it is $1 million. The hectareage fee for that exact same building, to put it in a greenfield site, is $299,000. That's the problem with this model, is that unless there's a reason why the $1 million project would absolutely want to locate downtown, it is significantly cheaper to put it in a greenfield project, which is what we're trying to avoid in some respects. In terms of the intensification, of the 60 applications received where the intensification levy has been applied to date, the largest applications so far have been the Regina Police Services expansion at $258,000, the YWCA at $269,000, and Argyle School at $418,000. To the point I believe Councillor LeBlanc and Councillor Stevens were trying to make, are these not-for-profit organizations, or are we just paying them to ourselves in terms of the Regina Police Services expansion? I believe we're responsible for the capital projects. It only works if it's net new money. If we're recycling existing money, this $125 million is just a fancy way of pulling from one to pay another. I would prefer it would be done away with. I prefer there be a model which has an allocation for all new property tax dollars that are created in the intensification area. A certain portion of them are contributed to a reserve fund specifically allocated to $125 million. Removing the barrier, we can continue at the pace we're at. We can continue to incentivize people to build in greenfield and development, and we'll continue to not have some of our brownfield development not go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, who's next here? Oh, there you go. Councillor Shaw, I think it's you.
Thank you for that. A lot of my questions were asked, answered. I do have an additional question to this. Since I'm a new councillor, and I'm not sure of the history behind this intensification levy, have we ever offered an incentive for people to build downtown through the chair?
Ms. Orlick?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So that was the report that we were bringing forward, was how do we incentivize development? Because the mayor's right, it's how do we, they all play in together, and it is about coming forward with some incentives with focused development, saying we want to see development in this area, and then incentivizing it. So that's part of the work that we are doing with the motion that council passed. I believe it was in April. So we're bringing a report forward regarding that.
Okay, so just to be clear, that's never been done before. You'll bring a report forward and then we'll see what.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, so it depends on the type of development. So with the housing incentive program, we did have specific areas for development for housing. Right. But if we're talking about commercial, those sorts of things, we had incentives for like corporate head offices and things like that. We had some incentives, but I think what we're going to bring forward is kind of bigger than that with respect to development in the core.
Right, and that's where that incentive will be talked about, is the development in the core and the report.
Well, through you, it was for the intensification area, but it would be we had brought forward for localized, like in certain areas. So yes, we'll bring that forward.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Bashani, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair. So I guess the one thing, this intensification policy, when it came forward a few years ago, I know there was already questions about it. Now it's kind of the lay of the land, and we've seen that there's really not been an uptake in this. So I absolutely support Councillor Hawkins to refer it back, and I want to challenge administration to think outside the box. Saskatoon works absolutely differently. And, you know, what we constantly hear is it's easier to develop in Saskatoon and it's cheaper to develop in Saskatoon. So we should go away, administration should go away and actually do the research and find out why. Every time I ask about the service agreement fees and all this, it's a model, it's so tough to understand. There's so many, you can't compare apples to apples. Well, maybe it's time we start actually comparing apples to apples and we start understanding, because guess what, at the end of the day, if a developer is coming here, we want them to be able to look at our policy and understand it. I think that's the one piece that I've heard with this intensification levy, is that a developer will come forward, they will ask a question of, they'll look at a piece of property they may want to buy, they only have a certain time. The city will come back, but it won't be with a number. And that's why I asked Mr. Onda. It's usually a 2 or 3 page letter that's saying every department, this is what the intensification could be. And it takes a long while to get that number. For someone who is any kind of an investor, that'd be the first question I want to know. What is it going to cost me to develop there? And if we can't do that, that's the first problem. And I think that's why we're not seeing the uptake. I just want to say this. The OCP, when it was developed in 13, the big discussion around that, and I wasn't there, but was about getting some development, getting the development downtown. It was a 70-30 split is what the whole gear was, to try and get that development down. I know we're not even near that. As we've heard, there's about 74 people that have moved downtown. Any city that we're talking about branding our city, we're talking to Tourism Regina, EDR, we need to, you know what the number one thing that comes up is the hole in our downtown, that it's not vibrant, there's nobody there. Vacant buildings. Wouldn't it be great to have an opportunity to say, okay, either we incent or we actually come up with a number that looks at that to say, and that's why I say go back to other cities. In this report, I think that that's something that I'm going to ask, that we actually look at what other cities are doing to look at the downtown, and Saskatoon in particular. The other piece that I want to just, when we talk about a city, what I've learned in all the research, we have to have an active downtown. We have to have people downtown. And if we don't have that, we will continue with everybody riding around the city, and businesses will be continually, because no one wants to live there if there's nothing happening. So I guess the point that Mayor Masters has asked a lot of the questions. I think this is vitally important, that if we truly want to see development downtown, that I think we do have to think outside the box in order to get that. And that's what I'm hoping this report comes back with. Leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Brashani. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. 2 comments. The first one is, I think administration's been given a bit of a rough ride today. On my read, they're implementing a policy that we approved on April 28th, 2021. So if we have concerns with the policy, I think that's on us. I think we should have a serious discussion about it, but it's not their failure to implement what we told them to do. They're following what we did, so the finger ought to be pointed at us. The second thing I'd say is that I broadly support Councillor Hawkins' referral motion. I agree we need to take a closer look at it. My concern with it is I understand there's a certain amount of capital projects we have to fund to pay for growth. If we separate number 2 out from number 1 and pass number 1 today, I'm worried that we tie our hands a little bit. So if we set the service agreement and development levy fees in stone, and then later come to deal with the intensification levy, I'm worried that we don't know how to make up that shortfall or purported shortfall in capital requirements. So I suppose my suggestion or proposal to Councillor Hawkins is that we refer the entire motion back rather than isolating number 2.
Chair, I have no problem referring the entire motion back if that's what it takes. But it does mean, because I presume there's some kind of deadline on administration to get this in place, that they're going to have to come back fairly quickly to council with this report. So my follow-on question to the administration was, if we refer it all back, can they get back to us answering the issue related to policy and establishment of dedicated reserves? Can they get back to us quickly is my question to the administration.
Ms. Howlett, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we can get something back fairly quickly with the regarding this. If I could just make a comment about the servicing, like the greenfield rates, the development levies. The cost, the 125, cannot be borne. It has to be the fair share model. That's through the Planning and Development Act. So the servicing agreement fees for the greenfields, that hectare rate is set on the policy and what they are legally to pay. So we can't take this, we can't take this fee and put it on that hectare rate. So that hectare rate, it's actually going down slightly because of the projects. So you can refer it all back, but at the end, that rate was set based on the policy and the regulations from the Planning and Development Act on what we can actually charge them.
So in light of that answer, I have no problem referring the entire matter back to the administration, bearing in mind that the focus is on the intensification levy aspect of this.
Okay, I'll give, Mayor Masters, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The intensification levy is only charged if there's intensification. I actually don't see them as being tied together. If no development goes ahead, then no intensification levy is collected, whereas if greenfield development goes ahead, then it's collected. In terms of if you get new property taxes, you can establish the formula for new property taxes to equal exactly what it is you're trying to do within 5 years of charging an upfront intensification levy. So I don't see them as tied together at all. Because if there's low intensification, they're not, I just don't see them as being tied together.
Subject to anything further Councillor LeBlanc wants to say, I therefore, in light of that, would just refer number 2. It'll be easier, it'll keep the focus on the issue that we're concerned about here. So I'm prepared to go with just number 2.
Okay, thank you. Still have a speaker. We're going to do playing with buttons. There you go. Councillor Zahedniak, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a report coming about attracting folks downtown. Please correct me if I didn't, that's my understanding, something in that regard. So that there's a report coming, and when is that due? That is my question. Through the chair.
For you, Mr. Chairman. So we do have a report coming back in Q2 of next year, and it had to do with the intensification levies and intensification within this area.
So,
and then there was additional work too with regards to understanding consumer needs to come, or what consumers want.
how would referring this report back, what impact would that, it sounds like it's some of the same work. So is it just that it would get done sooner now? Is that what would be the result of this referral?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think some of the work that's in the motion would still proceed with respect to the land strategy, et cetera. Some would come off. I think dealing with this now is fine. We can bring a report back to deal with this specific thing, and then we would, in that report, we'll just indicate what would have to change in that other report that we wouldn't be doing. So the report we'll bring back, if this motion passes, we'll indicate in that report the changes that other motion.
And I may have missed this, but in terms of this referral, what is the timing of when you folks are able to bring this back?
Through the chair, we would bring it back before the end of the year.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Got one more here. Okay. Playing with buttons again. Councilor Mancinelli, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I didn't really speak to this in my first round of comments, so I do have one or two comments and questions. This intensification levy has been around for a couple of years now. The problem we're dealing with was created prior to having an intensification levy. How did we used to deal with this? How did we build the problem into what we have today? Was it just not setting money aside? How did we get into a downtown intensification problem with the underground problems we see without it being addressed for 100 years?
Ms. Howlett?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think there was a couple questions in there. Some of the infrastructure issues we are seeing, that's just maintenance issues and renewal issues that we're dealing with. In the past, there wasn't a fee charged in this area, and then when the new policy came forward, it was like when the OCP came forward and we said we're going to intensify this area, which would require this upgrades for capacity in the system. That's when the discussion came about how do we fund the 125 million. And so it was at that time that the intensification levy was discussed, and that was what was approved. It was approved through that process and then developed through consultation and then came into effect in 2018.
Okay. I guess the reason I asked the question is if there's any factors that led to the problem that we might be repeating, can they be part of this report? A little bit of history. If we're going to a tax option, can we have a little bit of history on how positive or effective Regina has implemented tax options, and just to make sure we have a rounded information source for when we're reviewing this. And I appreciate the referral recommendation as well. I'll be supporting it.
Ms. Howlett?
Oh, through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, definitely we'll have that all in the report.
Okay. Councilman Mancini, that's good. Mr. Holden, I think, did you want to make a comment? You want to speak? Go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly today we're hearing council, and there is some frustration, and I think there's a desire for us to review a proposed policy that we could bring forward to council that will look at a different model. At the end of the day, the intensification levies and the projections out to 300,000, if we don't grow, obviously we don't need that same infrastructure because we're not increasing the capacity on the system. So, you know, Mrs. Harlech is committed to taking this away, and we will work as a collective team. There's lots of pieces of the organization that feed into this model, and we will get creative and we will get innovative in terms of what we bring back. We know that it's done differently in other municipalities across the country. Sometimes there's legislation that you know, allows that to move in one direction or another, but at the end of the day, yes, we know that council wants to grow Regina. We want to make Regina an attractive, you know, we want a vibe in our downtown that people want to live and visit. And our job as administration is to support council in bringing that forward. So we've heard you loud and clear today, and we will bring some policy recommendations forward. At the end of the day, to Mr. Lacey's point, we just have to figure out how to balance the ledger. If we want to increase, you know, the vibrancy of our downtown, we want to focus on new facilities, et cetera, then at the end of the day, there just needs to be decisions as to how we're going to pay for that as a community. And council obviously has the authority to make those decisions. So we will take this away today, and you will see, I think, some very interesting options and recommendations when we bring the report back before the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Okay. Councillor Hawkins.
To conclude, I just add that we have a contradiction in our current policies as they stand. We want to unlock that contradiction in a way that promotes growth in areas where we need growth, intensified areas, and we want to make sure we can do this in an environmentally sensitive way. I think the city manager and Ms. Harlech have captured the discussion, and I'm satisfied that they'll bring back an interesting report by the end of the year. I'd ask for support for referral.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Okay, we're done. So we will, Mr. Clerk, if I can call on you to on the referral.
Thank you. With respect to referring part 2, I will call on Councillor Hawkins, please.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Councillor Bresciani.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
For the record, Councillor Moll is absent. Mayor Masters.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Findura.
In favor.
The referral carries 10-0, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. So then we'll go back into our original report. And any further discussion on the main motion here? I don't see none. Okay, Councillor Stanishek. Okay, there you go. Oh, okay, we got some buttons. All right. Councillor Stanishek, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, this is the first time I've seen this long list of capital projects. So I did find it quite interesting to see the share of the SAF for those capital costs. What happens if if the city receives either provincial or federal infrastructure funding? What happens to these projects and the SAF share?
Ms. Harlech, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So that's a good question. What happens is when we review the model every year and all of the capital projects, if we are getting grant monies, that comes right off the top. So a good example is Wascana Pool was a good example where that one had citywide impacts. So there was taxpayer share, there was greenfield share, there was infill share, and then we got this grant. So that comes right off the top, and then we do the splits.
Okay. So if I get this correct, if as more infrastructure dollars, external dollars might come available, there's a constant adjustment to that fee. Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chairman.
So specifically, I just had one question regarding one of the capital projects, and that's in Appendix A, number 32, Hill Avenue and West Regina bypass. I just wanted to understand what this project is because Hill Avenue does not connect to the bypass. So if you could just explain that project.
Ms. Orla, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so that is for a long-term connection. I might ask if Ms. Gazmo could talk specifically about that project, or Ms. Lugner.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Lugner had to step away for a few minutes. That interchange was built as part of the bypass development and is a future connector that the city can use. As Ms. Harlech said, it's for long-term development, but it has been built already, and so it's about paying back to the Ministry of Highways the city's portion for constructing that interchange.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I'll probably follow up because I still don't completely understand, but thank you.
Are we playing buttons again? We are. Councillor Brashani, go ahead.
Thank you. Just on Appendix A, page 5, number 105, the Southeast Regina Roadway Capacity Solution for 10-3. So I guess, and I know that the study's being done, but is this work that's going to be done? Because there's a study being done, so I'm a little bit confused there.
Ms. Harlech?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I might start and ask Ms. Gazmo to expand, but yeah, so that's the whole, there is studies being done right now on Arcola and what are the ultimate needs. So these are some placeholders on what and could change based on those studies in terms of the longer term needs and outcomes. But I might ask Ms. Gazmo to go into more detail.
Okay, Ms. Gazmo?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not a lot to add more than what Ms. Harlech already said. It's really a placeholder in the 25-year model for what potentially could happen based on the outcomes of that study that is currently underway.
Thank you, through the chair. So can I ask also why the bridge is not in there as well?
Ms. Harlech?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So that was outside of the TMP before, and so we're redoing that. We're doing the study right now, and as I said, these projects, the reason why these project lists get updated every year and reviewed as new information comes in. So when that new study comes in, there'll be recommendations from that will change, could potentially change the projects that are in here, and that one could be added based on the recommendations and then what council approves.
Okay. Just a comment that I'll make, and you know, when I hear about the service agreement fees, they are for growth. And the Southeast is seeing the second highest growth in Regina, next to Harbor Landing. And it's, you know, sad to still see that that bridge has not made it on here when we know that's the bottleneck. I know it's going to come in the study, but when I look at, there's a new one that was added for 21 million, the Courtney Street and extension First Avenue North. Not that I'm pitting one against another, but when you look at the growth that we've had, we're almost at 30,000 people, and it's still not on the list. I'm just going to say it's frustrating, and I hope through this study, it's sad that we had to do a study, but of course that's the way we do it. But I hope that these are true growth related, because that's where the growth is. That's where we've had the growth. So the infrastructure should be following that, should have been there before the growth, but that's where it should be deemed. And it's, you know, still, I know, a ways out. So I look at these others and it's bare land, and I get that. So we, you know, we gotta, but we've got people waiting in the wings to get into their city center. Leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any more speakers here on the main motion. Councilman Snelly, you want? No, I don't see. Oh, you moved it. Okay, Councilman Snelly, do you want to close? You're good? Okay. Okay, so we're going to vote on the EX 21-60 as amended, and with removal of number 2. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you. I'll begin with Councillor Mancinelli, please.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor LeBlanc. In favor. Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Stevens. Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnicek.
In favor.
Mayor Masters.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Carries 10-0, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're, committee, we will move to EX 2162. We have a delegation, so we're just going to skip one and come back to 61. Mr. Hopkins is online, so we'd like to give him the time to speak. He's been waiting. Mr. Hopkins, you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's start this over again. Sorry about the little bit of mix-up. Could you please introduce yourself, who you represent, if any, where you're calling from? You'll have 5 minutes for your presentation. Afterwards, there'll be maybe questions from the committee. You go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day out there. My name is John Hopkins. I am Chief Executive Officer of the Regina District Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today on behalf of our 1,250 members to provide our thoughts and perspectives on the tax policy and affordability report. I would like to begin my comments by stating that the question and issue are not entirely clear. What problem is the report addressing, and what are we talking about? $1 million cost? $5 million cost? $100 million cost? I'm not entirely sure. This is not to say that we don't understand the broad scope of what is being asked, affordability from a property tax and water utility perspective. So where are we in terms of affordability and competitiveness? Well, according to the 2019 City of Calgary Property Tax and Utility Survey, we are the second lowest when it comes to municipal property tax compared to other sample homes in cities across the country. Second lowest. But when it comes to the utility alone, we're last. On the education property tax side, we're fourth highest. The report before you references the Water, Utility, and Property Tax Affordability Survey on many occasions. We responded to that survey, and to be blunt, we were shocked at how leading the survey is and how some of the questions did not provide the respondent to not support one position or another, but rather, which of the answers do you dislike the least? Moreover, there are not any comment boxes, which from our perspective is where the gold is within these surveys. It is where people get to actually say what they want to say. After working our way through the survey, we were then presented with what I would say was garden path all along. Make non-residential properties pay. There are many reasons we would strongly encourage you not to shift taxes from residential to commercial, or put another way, to get non-residential to pay for an affordability program. Probably top of mind and number one is that we are still in the middle of a pandemic that has devastated many businesses in our community. Some of these businesses have been dealt catastrophic blows. Is now really the time to be shifting taxes, or even talking about shifting taxes? I would say that's akin to kicking somebody when they are down. Number two, shifting taxes to non-residential may have the exact opposite impact that we as a community are trying to achieve, and that is opportunity for a resident. The last thing we should be doing is encouraging business that offer mortgage-paying jobs to locate out of our region or province, unless the strategy is for a community to subside on entry-level jobs. We need more manufacturers, more ag value add, more warehousing, and more crushing facilities. It is these large players in the economy that drive the economy by creating not only jobs, but opportunities for small business. There is talk within the business community that it is not necessarily a race to the bottom with the lowest tax in the world, although there are some, to be honest, but rather that we pay our fair share and be competitive. The report speaks to competitiveness, and we can concur it is an important consideration. On the competitive front, I would like to bring your attention to the fact that it's not just Saskatoon, Calgary, Winnipeg that we need to watch, but also the RMs of Sherwood and Edenwald. We're getting increasing numbers of new businesses, which is great, and also businesses that used to be located in Regina. Making comparisons number four, making comparisons between communities when looking at property tax is not easy, given there are very different methodologies like annual and biannual, or in our case, revaluations every 4 years. And of course, then the base date would change, and market conditions may be very different in the 4-year cycle versus a 1 or a 2-year cycle. Not to mention the fact that the non-residential makeup of a community like Calgary would be primarily office, and in Regina, it would be primarily a warehouse or warehouses. 5, if our goal within both the OCP and the property tax policy is to encourage economic growth, shifting taxes would have the opposite effect. There are several options in how to generate funding within the report, including base tax, subclasses, and rebates, among others. We would respectfully request that if we hold true to the ad valorem system as being the fairest way to generate taxes, then why would we not use the same methodology for an affordability program? While some may not like me saying this, if you decide to adopt a program or programs to address affordability, then use the same tax base you currently use, both residential and commercial, or non-residential is what you should use. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much, Mr. Hopkins. I will see if anyone from the committee would like to ask questions. No, going once. Oh, there we go. We've got a question. Just 1 second. Mr. Brashani, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins, for being here. Just, you used the wording, we're kick someone with when they're down. The business. Can you just, and highlight if there was a change in moving to increasing the commercial tax. This is kind of the people that you speak to. I think you said many members. Just please tell me the impact that this could have, and would that, in your view, would it mean that businesses may close? Through the chair.
Mr. Hopkins, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question. Let me just try to frame it properly. I think that there are some businesses that have done fine throughout the pandemic and maybe even have done even way better than they thought through the pandemic. And so there's that grouping. But there are also some within, let's say, the hospitality sector that have been devastated by the pandemic. They have faced very, very significant challenges. And the reality is some of those and some retailers that were shut down are nowhere near having the ability to recoup what their losses were over the course of the last, it's getting close to 2 years now. And so those smaller businesses, shifting taxes to them could have a significant impact, and shifting taxes to even some of the larger players may have a significant impact. The report that I referenced, the City of Calgary 2019 Property Tax and Utility Survey, which is the latest one that they have, one of the interesting things that I found in that report is Regina is the second highest when looking at office space per 100,000, per 1,000 square foot of space at $5,622. So there's an impact there as well. How many businesses would close? Well, it would add to the challenges they're already having out there with the pandemic. And if we're talking about shifting taxes to non-residential, that's going to continue to have, will be another impact is not expected at this time to increase taxes to businesses. Sorry about the long answer.
Thank you. And you referenced Calgary. I remember reading that a couple of years ago. And just correct me, or if you can elaborate, that businesses did close. They moved it up, and I'm not sure if it was what the split was, but then the homeowners had to take on the business, obviously, because businesses closed. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. There was a number of the office sector collapsed because of the energy crisis that we have in this country, and and as well as the price of oil drop. And then we had a lot of challenges with getting product to Tidewater. But what happened in Calgary is a lot of the office space went vacant, and some of it was brand new. And so the tax base was eroded to the point that the city of Calgary had to go to residential ratepayers to fund the operations of the city, because on the non-residential side, it wasn't working anymore.
Great. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, we got questions. Councillor Shaw?
Through the chair, I just have a quick question. I'm not sure if you can answer this or give me a rough estimate, Mr. Hopkins. Would you happen to know the number of jobs that's created by industry here in Regina, through the chair?
Mr. Hopkins?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I'll get that to you. I mean, that's an important thing in terms of where we are. And this is one of the things, thank you for the question. This is one of the things that we're going to start to track and look at more closely is one of the best I've ever seen at this, and he's not with us anymore, was Doug Elliott, and he had a publication called SAS Trends Monitor. And within that publication, the last 2 pages, which were always the gold for me, he tracked things like that on a provincial basis and sometimes on a municipal basis. And he tracked a lot of different things in terms of sales and population, all of those things. So we're going to look to try and do something like that in 2022, and we'd be happy to share that with you.
That would be great. Thank you. So just kind of an added question to that, because I looked into Calgary and seen the effects that happened when that was done. I'd just like to have on record, I mean, if we don't have the industry, we don't have the tax base from residential. So it's kind of, from your experience, since you're in there and you know this much better than I do, is it safe to say that due to the industry, the taxes that we charge industry, that's an incentive for them to come here, or has it been a disincentive to come here to Regina?
Mr. Hawkins?
Well, that is a great question. Thank you so much for the question, and hopefully it doesn't take me too long to answer this, but I just want to
I think it's
sort
very
of frame it
important.
right, Dan.
Thank you.
Pardon me?
I said I think it's very important, so yes, please take your time.
Okay. Well, I've been around this probably, some would say way too long, but when I started my career, Regina was in a very bad place. It was so bad that people in Regina and throughout the province, they had to decide in, grade 9, 10, 11, where they were going to go, because there were no jobs here. There was nothing happening here. I remember doing a report called Action Regina many years ago, and we tracked a lot of economic indicators, and in so many places, Regina was not doing well. And that was in part because of the tax rates that we had, and then there were changes made, and this city started to grow and started to turn a corner. And throughout the time now, since the revaluations, and we work very, very closely with you, in partnership with you, I would say, on getting the message out and the right message out about how this all works. Regina started to grow. Was it just because of what happened at City of Regina? No, it was, there were a lot of things on the resource side that clicked in, and we started to grow. We started to create opportunities. And then all of a sudden, Regina started to be a place that was a beacon for people, not only in the province, but throughout the country and even internationally, that wanted to come here because there were opportunities here. And because people were coming here, that created other opportunities. And, things like Loblaw building their plant there and employing what I think it's around 700 people, 700 to 1,000 people. That was great news for Regina. And we continued to prosper here, and home values increased, and a lot of things kicked in. And now I know on the home values side, there's another discussion that could be had, and say that before all this, and I've had this before all this happened, John. My house value was it was cheaper, my mortgage was cheaper, all of those things. But on the other side of the equation, the most important investment that most people make is their home. And for like a decade, I can recall, they didn't move at all. And so we've seen a lot of growth in this community, and I think a lot of things that have been very, very positive, including jobs. And that's another one of the key indicators we're going to be looking at and watching for in 2022 is have a lot of those economic indicators that SAS Trends Monitor used to have, so that we understand what's going on, at least quarterly, with the economy. And having the right competitive environment for business is so important. And I think many of us are trying to encourage more. And I think the news that we've heard lately has been fantastic in terms of large players coming into the Regina market, which creates opportunity for jobs, which brings people to our community, as well as provides people in our community with the opportunity for jobs. And what we're creating here collectively, these are not entry-level jobs, and we've never really had an interest in entry-level jobs. It has been more of those mortgage-paying jobs, so that Regina can continue to be a great place to raise a family. And compared to back in the old days when I first started, and when there were no jobs. And yeah, you could get a house for cheap because there were no jobs. So that's the difference. And just to be fair, I don't want to say that it's just because of property tax, but it's one of the considerations, among others, that businesses will look at in terms of whether they're going to expand or new businesses are going to come here. And so I think that we've done a great job as a community over the last number of years, and I think we need to continue to move down that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very clear answer to the question. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shaw. I see no further questions, Mr. Hopkins. Appreciate your hanging on and presenting and answering questions. Now you may leave the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Okay, committee, we will take our break and we'll come back. Our break is scheduled for 11:15. We're right about there. So we'll come back here 25 or 27 past the hour to continue. So thank you. Yeah. Okay. So if we can get things started. So I need someone first to make a motion that EX 2161 be forwarded to the September 29th City Council meeting, and EX 2163 utility report tabled to October 6th executive. Anyone? Because it's interest of time. Okay. So I think I have a motion, Councilor Brasciani. Anyone opposes to that? No? Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much. So now we're gonna move on. We're gonna go into EX 2162. Can I ask someone from administration to introduce the report? Mr. Lace, I think that's you. I will find, there you go. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the report in front of you is in response to direction from Executive Committee in June of 2020. And then it's further been informed with subsequent discussions and verbal referrals from Council since then with respect to additional matters that they wished us to include in this report. So in the report in front of you, it includes a number of key areas that have been reviewed, and further information or information provided to Council. A review of the property tax subclasses and the creation of subclasses to accomplish specific objectives, the use of a base tax, implications of changing the share of taxes paid by residential and non-residential properties to improve property tax affordability for residential property owners, and potential property tax affordability programs for low-income property owners. I would say in reviewing this report, something to keep in mind is that while the report kind of addresses each of these issues separately, you can use a number of the tools and the outcome and the implications change as you look at how you use those tools. We have prepared a presentation. I know there's a lot of information here, and it's a fair amount of work has been done by administration. It's fairly complex. And so to further inform deliberation and discussion at Executive Committee here, we have a presentation. And at this point, I'll hand the presentation over to Deborah Bryden, who's our Director of Assessment and Property Revenue Services, and Tanya Mills, our Manager of Property Revenue Systems. Over to you, Deborah.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Tanya's just getting the presentation up on the screen here. All right, so thank you. I am Deborah Bryden, as Barry mentioned, Director of Assessment and Property Revenue Services. With me is Tanya Mills, Manager of Property Revenue Systems. And we also have Aaron Hertis and John Diffentorum on the line, and they are Policy and Procedure Analysts in our department. So we have a lot of material here before you today, as Barry mentioned, and the report is organized so that each of the pieces of Council's request is included in the unique appendix. Also included are supporting appendices that include jurisdictional scans and engagement. So the purpose of this presentation is just to highlight some of the key findings in each of these appendices. We'll begin by reviewing property tax affordability and options for property tax affordability programs. And then we're going to discuss the impacts of utilizing an assortment of property tax tools available to Council. I also want to mention that in the analysis you see, the report, it's limited to municipal property taxes only. The tax tools and options didn't consider impacts or participation from other taxing authorities. This isn't to say that other taxing authorities wouldn't participate in any kind of tax tool policy that council would adopt, but the city would need to obtain agreement from the other taxing authorities for their participation where applicable. So now I'll hand it over to Ms. Mills.
Good morning, everyone. So a major piece of this report is identifying and evaluating the potential property tax affordability programs. So this is Appendix D in the committee report. In determining potential options, we first look to define what property tax affordability means and how we would measure it. We found that property tax affordability is not typically uniquely analyzed and is usually considered as part of a larger shelter affordability, which includes the cost of property taxes, rent or mortgage payments, utility and maintenance costs, and other municipal services. For our analysis, we use the shelter cost to income ratio, which considers those larger shelter costs in relationship to household income. What we found is best practice in using this ratio is to say that shelter is affordable if households are spending less than 30% of their annual income on shelter costs. So using that 30% income to shelter cost threshold, we found that there are approximately 7,825, or 12% of homeowners in Regina that experience shelter unaffordability. It's important to note that these numbers are based on 2016 data, as that's the most recent census information available. This number, 12%, compares with other prairie cities where rates of shelter unaffordability average around 14%. We also found that shelter unaffordability is not necessarily tied to income levels, as unaffordability is experienced by those at varying income levels. While there are approximately 12% of homeowners experiencing unaffordability, only 3,800 of those are below the low-income cutoff as defined by Stats Canada. Shelter unaffordability is more closely tied to household size, with people living alone experiencing greater unaffordability. For example, singles living alone account for 47% of households that experience unaffordability. So the next step in the affordability work was to identify what programs other municipalities are using. We conducted a jurisdictional scan of 35 municipalities across Canada and 9 provinces, and found that 18 municipalities and 9 provinces have property tax affordability programs. The programs identified include tax deferrals and rebates or grant programs. In addition to those 2 programs, we also looked at one-time assistance payments as a program option. Next, we conducted a public engagement through Be Heard Regina. This ran from May 28th to June 30th. This online questionnaire was designed to provide Regina residents with a public engagement opportunity to share opinions with the city. It was not meant to be a statistically valid survey conducted with a random selection of respondents. Residents were asked to participate through inserts in their property tax and utility bills, a news release, and social media advertising. The purpose of this engagement was to engage the overall public on their general level of support for affordability programs. We asked the public 3 main things in relation to property tax affordability programs. Should we have an affordability program? If we did have a program, who should it support and what should it look like? And finally, if there was a program, how should it be funded? Based on the results of the public engagement, we found that 70% of the 2,924 participants expressed some level of support for property tax and utility affordability programs. 57% supported program eligibility for low-income households, while 31% supported program eligibility for specific demographic groups. There was almost equal support for programs tailored at seniors and those that include households that include those living with a disability. And in terms of affordability program types, support was strongest for rebates, and support for deferrals and grants were almost even. So this slide is just a snapshot of the results. The full engagement results are found in Appendix G of the report, and also additional feedback that we received outside the survey is included as Appendix H. So given all that information, we evaluated 3 program options on affordability, equity, community support through the public engagement, and administrative program costs. And while the full analysis of each program type can be found in Appendix D, this table represents the results of the evaluation. Here, boxes marked in green indicate improvement from the current state. Those indicated in yellow show little or no improvement, and boxes in orangey red indicate deterioration from the current state, while hash marks indicate mixed impact or complexity. To summarize, based on the evaluation, we found rebates are the most likely to improve affordability and were given the highest level of support in the survey. One-time assistance payments impact affordability in the short term, but were given the lowest level of support, and tax deferrals, on the other hand, offer temporary relief but have no direct impact on affordability, as the full deferred amount will have to be repaid, usually with interest. Both rebates and one-time assistance programs would reduce property tax revenue and therefore may require an increase to the mill rate, and deferrals may require short-term cash flow considerations.
Thanks, Tanya. Tax tools. So you have, you've all seen this information before, so this is kind of a refresher to start us. The Cities Act outlines tax tools available to determine the distribution of property tax burden. Some tools are provincial, while others are available for use at City Council's discretion. Tax tools are a mechanism for Council to distribute the tax burden. A reduction in tax for one property class usually results in increased taxes for other property classes or types. It's important to note that tax tools are not meant to increase a municipality's tax revenue. The overall tax burden to be levied is determined by the budget process. Currently, the City of Regina uses mill rates, mill rate factors, property classes, and subclasses. Council also approved a phase-in plan to reduce the impacts of revaluation. Comparing property tax tools across municipalities is complex, as provincial legislation varies by province, and every municipality is unique in the level of services provided and alternate revenue sources. Tax tools are typically used in accomplishing specific policy objectives, and therefore there's really no best practice in terms of tax tool usage. So current state, the city has adopted the following tax principles with every revaluation since 1997. Stability, predictability, and sustainability, equity, fairness, and transparency, and that decisions must be made in the best interest of the community. These main themes are entrenched in the OCP towards achieving three economic goals: economic vitality, competitiveness, economic growth, and economic generators. The city currently defines 5 property classes: residential, multi-residential, commercial, industrial, railway, and agriculture. In addition, in 2001, Council established the golf course subclass for tax relief purposes to offset the direct competition between municipal golf courses and commercial golf courses, because municipal golf courses are exempt from property tax. Consistent with its tax principles, the city adopted a long-standing policy of keeping the share of taxes stable in each revaluation. Changing the share of tax using mill rate factors is one of the tools analyzed in this report. The analysis can be found in Appendix A. The city's current tax split is approximately 64.1% residential and 35.9% non-residential. This is comparable to the average of other prairie cities. Modeling showed that for a 1% reduction in the residential share of municipal tax, residential municipal property tax is reduced by approximately 1.6%, and non-residential property tax would go up by approximately 2.8%. The table on the slide shows the impact of a 1% shift in the municipal taxes for sample properties. The amount of tax increases are more significant for non-residential properties than the tax decreases for residential. The Be Heard engagement survey asked respondents what level of shift from residential to non-residential properties they would support. 62 respondents, which were many residential property owners, supported some level of shift. Of the respondents who pay commercial property tax, the large majority did not support a shift. Another tool we were asked to explore is the use of a base tax. A base tax is a specific amount of money applied equally to all properties or on one or more property class or subclasses. A base tax is usually used to fund specific initiatives or services that all or a group of taxpayers have equal access to. Alternatively, the city has been using dedicated mill rate increases. An analysis on the use of base tax, including 2 hypothetical scenarios, is included in Appendix B. This table the table on the slide illustrates the results of a $500 general base tax. Regardless of the scenario, implementation of a base tax results in a reduction of taxes for higher value properties and an increase in taxes for lower value properties. The next tool we explored was subclasses. The analysis of current subclass use and examples of how subclasses may be used to accomplish specific objectives is found in Appendix C. Subclasses are useful in accomplishing specific objectives for a subset of properties. One challenge in implementing a subclass is how it's defined. If a subclass is created for a property characteristic not used for assessment purposes, it may require an application process. An application process would only be effective where the class is seeing a reduction in taxes, as the property owner is unlikely to apply for a property class that would increase their tax. In 2001, Council established a golf course subclass for tax relief purpose, as I mentioned earlier, and that is the only subclass we currently use in Regina. The analysis we found, or in our analysis, it shows that tax impacts of creating a new subclass will depend on the new subclass's share of the total assessed value relative to the share of the compensating property class. Typically, subclasses can create significant impacts on targeted groups, with minor impact on larger property class groups. There may also be a larger tax policy implication when using property subclasses, if they are used to shift the tax burden between classes. In that instance, the impacts would be compounded by the points discussed previously when we talked about the share of tax. If tax tools are to be used in supporting any initiative, their application should be explored in relation to the initiative to assess their best use in accomplishing objectives. Some of the most recent initiatives that intersect with the tools we've discussed here today. If tax tools are to be used to support these pieces of work, specific engagement and research should be conducted in relation to each initiative to ensure the use of tax tools would accomplish their unique goals, or whether other tools may be better suited. There are strategic considerations and impacts that need to be considered when moving forward with changes to how we distribute property tax or implement some type of tax affordability program. The OCP priorities and goals, and our current tax policy. So the goals within the OCP support the use of affordability programs to enhance quality of life for those in disadvantaged positions. This also needs to be balanced with the need for the city to establish tax rates and mechanisms that support sustainable services, economic expansion, and enhances competitiveness. The city's current tax policy is strongly based on the property tax principles discussed earlier. While implementing tax tools to accomplish strategic objectives can also be done in alignment with these principles, it is important to consider those most impacted by the potential change. Should Council wish to implement an affordability program, target groups should be consulted to ensure they address the needs of the community and reflect the voices of those most affected. Similarly, should Council wish to implement a change to tax policy, those most impacted should be engaged and informed through a communication strategy prior to any change, allowing them time to adjust or make financial plans accordingly. That's our presentation today. We know a lot of information in front of you, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lichtenberg, we'll come back to you, or we'll direct the questions. Okay. questions from the committee? Okay, we go. Councilor Brasciani, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this report. Back over a year ago, I remember the conversation well. We had asked to have some options to look at if it was for affordability or base tax or any others that we may consider. One of the questions that I have is around, and I know when we talk about a base tax, when I looked at the report, I didn't see there, but I think PA also has put a base tax in for their police. Can you just elaborate on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you for that, Ms. Brasciani. When we did the survey, we sent a survey out to all of the municipalities asking for their information. And Prince Albert at that time did not share their base tax information. We have since reviewed, and they did adopt a base tax, quite an extensive base tax policy. And they currently have a base tax, one of their base taxes is $35 per property for policing.
$35?
35.
Okay, good. That's just good to know. I would like to know, when we discussed this, one of the options was, and I did raise it back then, was for seniors and people with disability. And I see that it's been done in other cities as well, but it's not a cost to anyone. It's just a deferral. Is that accurate? And how would that work? If you can elaborate, please.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the tax deferral option is, lots of municipalities have adopted a similar type of a program, and as well the province of Saskatchewan has adopted a tax deferral policy for low-income seniors on the education portion of their taxes. And so a tax deferral would actually not have a direct impact. There may be some initial financing impacts for the city, although probably pretty minuscule. And then eventually the city would get their taxes. The program would be, in most cases, it seems to be an application process. Seniors apply, and then some programs can defer different, some programs allow for the deferral of a portion of their taxes, all of their taxes, or there's different, some of them do different options for that deferral type.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Brasciani, you are the mover of the report, kind of going ahead of myself here. So, and go ahead, continue.
Okay, thank you. So just in regards to the survey, and I know you provided the information there, there were concerns with the survey that was kind of feeding down a rabbit hole where people couldn't add in their own comments. So do not support the affordable housing piece or to continue on. And there was only about I think it was 2,900 that had participated in that. If there were, there would be a lot more work to do if any of these would move forward. What would the engagement look like?
So the engagement, I might actually defer that to Ms. Mills to respond, and perhaps Ms.
Mills, go ahead.
So depending on the program options, the engagement we would look to engage specifically the target groups. So for example, if it was for low-income seniors, we might look to do some specific engagement with the age-friendly committee as well as other program groups specifically for those who would be utilizing the program.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the things that I'll make a comment, and then I do have, I'd like to move, but I do have a comment that I do think that we are in a pandemic, and it is our economy is very fragile right now. I would not suggest at all recommending to move to a more affordability for anyone, because I think we can't judge affordability. Someone may live in a large home and they may have a high mortgage, which doesn't mean that they're any wealthier than anyone else. And I think that's the real concern is that we start trying to, judge people on areas they live or where they live. And I think it becomes a real concern. We heard from the chamber as well as business, and I think that's another very important piece that they are still suffering. But I would like to move option 1, and that's the to provide direction to administration to develop a municipal property tax deferral program for low-income senior. And I'd like to add in there people with disability as well for council's consideration by Q2 of 2022. And I apologize, Amber, I didn't give you but it's on page 2 in other options. So it would just.
Just your referral referring that?
No, not to refer. I'm just making them to put it on the floor. It's an amendment. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, anyone want to speak to Mr. Brashenis? Okay, I think I've got.
So can I just?
Councillor Shaw?
Sorry, can I just speak to it first?
Go ahead.
So the reason I wanted to bring this one forward is this is something that we've been talking about for the last few years. I know we've heard from seniors as well, people with disability, in the fact that it's very hard for them to sometimes keep up with the taxes on top of everything else, as they may be on old age security. But the nice benefit to this one is that it goes on to their own mortgage. So when they go to sell the home, they're able then to, whoever it is, if it's the family, they're able to defer it. And that's the benefit here. It's not costing the taxpayer anything. And there's benefit to quality of life for this. I think we know with the age-friendly that we know that if people can stay in their homes longer, the benefit to their health and well-being. So, and the report on page 2 is very, it explained it very well. So thank you for that. That's all I have.
Okay, Councillor Shaw, go ahead.
I would just like to speak in favor of this amendment. What I know, we talked about 30% of our income goes to shelter. When you mortgage a house, you can only go above your 40% debt service ratio. So whatever your income is, you can only afford a house that's up to 40%, based on the wage that you're making. Now the problem where this falls into place, and I heard this lots from seniors and people with disabilities, their income in their house is based on their income when they were working. They're no longer working, so therefore everything's different and it all changes. People with disabilities, if you can get a house while you have a disability, then that's one thing. But I've also and we all know, lots of people that have had a disability after they've owned their home. That's when they start struggling. That's when they're having problems. They can't find jobs or so on and so forth. So for those reasons, I'm in favor of this, and I support this very much. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair, the report mentions that the provincial government has a deferral program for the education portion. Do we have any information, a little more information on it and what the uptake of that is?
Ms. Bryan?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to defer that one to Ms. Mills.
Ms. Mills, go ahead.
Through the chair, we don't have any information on the uptake of the provincial program. The city of Saskatoon also has a similar program. At last check, I believe they had around 57 properties participating in the program.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, sorry. At last check, I believe the city of Saskatoon had around 57 properties participating in their program.
57 properties. Okay.
If I might add to that,
Okay.
just, I think part of your question was on how that provincial program works. So the way it works is the resident would pay their property taxes, and then they provide a receipt indicating they've paid the municipality their property taxes, and they apply annually every year when they pay those taxes to the province. And I think that is, it's funded through, I think it's funded through CMHC, and it is on their title, etc. when they apply.
In terms of the measure in terms of low income, I noticed that in some of the tables that some provinces base it on if you are below the low income cutoff line, the LICO, or the guaranteed income supplement if you're receiving the. So one of the concerns that I have is that that's really low income, those two measurements. And if someone is just above that threshold, then they wouldn't be eligible. So are there any thoughts that you have in terms of how we would measure? Would we use one of those two measurements in terms of low income? Or that's still to be determined if this came back as a report?
Ms. Bryden, does that go to you?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we use, in our numbers and calculations with the information that we have, we use the LICO after tax. That is the measure that we use in other city policies for transit community services at this point in time. And I guess, further to that, it doesn't really matter what line you pick. There's always going to be some that are just over, and yeah, there are other measures that can be used, but they're not easy to get the statistics on, and they may only, like we talk about them in the report, like for example, the market share, the market basket, but it's only for a family. So, that income is different. So that's kind of where we landed on with the LICO.
Through the chair, and one more question. The motion before us is looking at low-income seniors and people with disability. One of the conclusions in your report is that in terms of people who are spending 30% or more of their income on shelter, sometimes it has to do with the kind of household it is. So it could be a single mom who is struggling to make ends meet. So would we have any information in terms of what that breakdown of low income would look like in the city? In terms of, is it, single moms? Is it people with disabilities, seniors? Do we have that kind of information?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll defer that one to Ms. Mills.
Through the chair, we don't have it on that detail. We do have the information based on household size, but as to what compromises that household, we don't necessarily have that.
Okay. That's all my comments for now, but I am generally in support of this, but I am concerned that it does leave out some critical people who might be struggling in. So that's all I'll say for now.
I'll give Ms. Lacey, you want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Yes, no, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just as we've been talking about low income and definition of low income, I wouldn't mind just seeking clarity from the mover of the motion. You speak to low income seniors. I'm interpreting that to be low income peoples of disabilities as well. So we're talking about low income in both demographic brackets, but it's important for us just to seek clarification of the intent of the motion.
It's written in the report.
So, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. So the option in the report just referred to low-income seniors. I just want to confirm that we're referring to low-income peoples with disability.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay, I think Councillor Stevens, you were...
No, it's to the main motion.
The main motion, okay.
Oh, is it me?
Councillor Edna? Yeah. go
Okay.
ahead.
So, based on some of the comments that folks have made, I wonder if the mover of the amendment might be willing to consider that it would, an amendment for low-income individuals. So not specific simply to seniors or, oh, what happened to the word? Okay. So not specific to just seniors or folks with a disability, just anyone who is low, who falls into the category of low income. Are you asking? Yeah, that's what I had said, yeah.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Sure. So I'm wondering about if you would be open to an amendment for just low income individuals, not just specifically seniors or folks with a disability, just anyone who falls in the category of low income.
I'd like to throw that back to administration to see, because that was not part of the recommendation in the report. I'd like to know why, and if it's done in other cities or if it's done before. I was really focusing on the seniors and the people with disability because of the fact that they're not working. Their income has changed. Many seniors are retired. Some may have a part-time job, but some they're done working. And the way it is for everything else has gone up, but their old age security has not gone up. Mm-hmm. People who are working and can work and own a home, I mean, I guess I'm going to ask administration, the question was, is it in other cities that we see these deferral programs for anyone that's deemed low income? Not seniors, not people, just across the board, anyone.
Ms. Bryden, does that go to you, or where are we going with that?
I guess I'm asking the staff.
Okay.
Okay, go
Through
ahead.
the chair,
Ms. Mills?
so we did find that most programs are targeted at low-income seniors, with some municipalities offering programs for people living with a disability, and that was typically because those living or those demographics of people have limited ability to change their income situations.
Yeah, that's right.
So that we did not find many programs that were targeted at all low-income homeowners, but there are a couple out there.
Okay. So with that response, I would leave it at this.
You said you'll leave it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all I have.
Okay. Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
Thank you. Apologies earlier, I wasn't sure about procedure and when we come back. I just have a question for administration in terms of the assumptions built into the costing of this option as well as the other option. Are you expecting 100% uptake, 75, half? What's the formula, please?
I'm going to you, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll just speak, and then Tanya, Ms. Mills might add to that. But generally, we haven't, in the municipalities that have these type of programs, there is not a huge uptake. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let Tanya speak to like the costing of the program. Okay. I'd also like to remind you that for a deferral program, it's really a matter of just financing that deferral, so it's not as much of a costing burden, so to speak.
Okay.
Ms. Mills?
Okay. Okay, Ms. Mills, go ahead.
Through the chair, we did make some assumptions in terms of uptake. For example, for deferrals, we have found that they are typically less utilized, whereas rebates, we found that program would be likely more utilized. So we assumed there would be more participation in a rebate style program.
Thank you. So I'd like to make an amendment that would include option 2. There's 2 ways we can do this. One can just be the mover accepts it, or secondly, that we then vote on that as a standalone. So to be clear, option 2 is provide direction to administration to develop a rebate program for all low-income homeowners for council's consideration by Q2 of 2022. This can be, again, either seen as a friendly amendment or a substantial alteration of it. So low income would just be a blanket statement.
Thank you.
That's to the mover.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Councillor Shani?
so I really would, I won't accept the amendment. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I'd like to just deal with this one first, and if he wants to bring that forward after, that's fine. There is a real difference in Councillor Stevens' amendment to bring on to you, because there's a cost to other taxpayers in that one, where this one there's no cost. This is cost only to, the cost stays with that individual, so there's no cost to anyone else, any other taxpayer. So I will just remain with my amendment that I brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So procedurally, because Councillor Stevens' amendment to Councillor Bresciani's motion is not contrary, in my opinion. It's adding something to it. Notwithstanding that Councillor Stevens asked Councillor Bresciani if she would accept it, I'm saying procedurally that he can make the amendment to add this, and then you will discuss the amendment, and then you will vote on the amendment.
The amendment to the amendment?
That's right. Well, it's not an amendment to the amendment. Councillor Bresciani has now made a motion. The other thing was just an administrative, take this off the record. So it would be my advice or recommendation that Councillor Stevens' amendment is in order. You now debate about him wanting to expand the coverage in this report and vote on it. And if it passes, then we go back to what Councillor Bresciani wants.
No.
I'm saying procedurally, Councillor, that's the way this works.
Okay. So just point of order. It's always been my experience that the councillor who makes the motion can accept the amendment.
And that's true, but Councillor Stevens asked if you would accept it as a friendly amendment. In other words, you would agree to this and it would now be part of your motion. If you're not accepting of that, he has the option to say, fine, then I'm going to put it on the record as I'm making this amendment. That's the distinction here. You have the right to accept or reject a friendly amendment. If you reject it, he still gets to do this because it is in sync with the entire motion.
Well, can we vote on them separately then?
Yes. You will, but you will deal with the amendment first. Councillor Stevens' amendment to your motion has to go first because you deal with amendments prior to you going to the main motion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Bresciani, what's your stance on that?
Well, I understand it. He's saying he's allowed to go forward
Yes.
with it, so.
So we're going to do two. Okay.
Chair, I'm going to challenge the clerk's ruling on the basis that Councillor Stevens' amendment to the amendment substantially changes the initial amendment.
Okay. Mr. Clerk?
Again, all I can do is give you my position and advice based on what I believe this is. The motion from Councillor Bresciani is actually the action motion. What was on the table on your report was just to take something off the public record of outstanding items. So Councillor Bresciani, in the opinion of the Deputy Clerk and I, she has made a motion that we want to see option 1. Go and do that work. Councillor Stevens has said, I would like to see you incorporate that into a larger report by including all low-income homeowners. I believe that that is in keeping with the spirit of Councillor Bresciani's advice. It adds to it. It's not taking away from it. The implications of what it might be are not the foundation by which someone would rule a motion in order or out of order. That's something you decide in your discussion.
Okay. Okay, I guess I'll rule. So I'll give Councillor Stevens Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Well, on the fine procedure, I challenge the ruling of the clerk. If the ruling of the clerk is the ruling of the chair, we then have to vote on the challenge.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Okay, so we will vote on Councillor Hawkins challenging the ruling from the clerk. So, okay, yes, all right, so here we go, yes or no?
Waving pinky rub.
Okay, so Councillor Hawkins has challenged the ruling of the chair that the amendment is in order. So what you're doing here is, if you agree that the amendment is in order, it's getting complicated. If you believe that Councillor Stevens' amendment is in order, you will vote against Councillor Hawkins' challenge to the chair. So if you don't want to, if you accept Councillor Hawkins' position that this is out of order, then vote against. Keeping,
no, in
or
favor.
for, I'm sorry.
In favor.
So if you don't want to see Councillor Stevens' amendment go forward, you're accepting Councillor Hawkins' challenge, and you vote yes. Yes if you want this gone. Okay? Does that...
That doesn't preclude Councillor Stevens from bringing his motion following the decision on Councillor Bresciani's motion. This isn't dispositive of Councillor Stevens' motion.
Yeah.
Well,
There's a way out of this. Mr.
the
Clerk.
way would be to vote whether how you want to proceed on this, and then if Councillor Hawkins or if Councillor Stevens, depending on the decision, will subsequently decide what he might want to do. But I will caution that I might want to just check with the city solicitor at the break, because this is getting very twisted procedurally, and I have to admit we're going back and forth, and I want to make sure that I've got this correct.
Do we give the...
If you want to...
He doesn't want to talk.
We just want to make sure that Councillor Stevens' motion can come after this.
Correct.
Is my
So
point.
we do Councillor Hawkins first.
Right.
And then after that, we'll come back.
The end result, you know, with respect, Councillor Findura, with respect, if Councillor Stevens doesn't get it now but gets it later, the end result is going to be 2 reports or 1 report. That's all I was saying, is that from a policy perspective, it may not make any difference if they're both approved, but that's fine.
Okay.
So
everyone is clear with what we...
How do you want to proceed?
Councillor Stevens?
So Councillor Stevens, you have the option, if you wish to proceed with your amendment at this point in time, or pull it and we can go back to Councillor Bresciani's original one, if that provides the clarification that people are looking for.
That was my intention, and so I just want to be perfectly clear that I can still bring this amendment forward, and we can package option 1 and 2 as separate votes as this report. That's what I wanted in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, because I support Councillor Bresciani's motion. I don't want it to be either or.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, I'm happy to withdraw the amendment if I can bring it back.
Sure.
So we'll go into Councillor Bresciani's motion, and after that, so we don't have to worry about Councillor Hawkins then. Perfect. We're clear? Everyone clear now? All right.
Call the vote.
Okay, let's call this thing.
Does Councillor Bresciani wish to speak anymore?
I think we're good.
Close it?
Yeah, we
Go
call
ahead.
it- I think it's very clear.
That's good? Okay.
Just to be, like, it's still up there, we're just voting on something.
Councillor Bresciani, correct. So, everyone clear on that? Okay, Mr. Clerk?
Councillor Findura, I'll begin with Councillor Bresciani then, please. Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
In favor.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Mancinelli has left the meeting. Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
In favor.
Mayor Masters.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Carries 9-0, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So now we can bring it back to Councillor Stevens, go ahead.
Yeah, Amber, if you could bring that back up.
It's 2 missing, so I'm here, yeah.
So again, just to be clear, this is essentially requesting a report based on option 2. So we have the fundamentals already in here. I'd like to say to administration, thank you very much for the public engagement, for the research. This is probably one of the most comprehensive reports on taxation that we've seen. It's very helpful. The spirit behind this was actually to stop a million questions coming up on an annual basis about taxation, just to put it all together so we have enough information to make a decision going forward. Supported Councillor Bresciani's motion. The reason I want this to be more comprehensive is this is kind of the situation we're in the city right now. So if we look at the data they've provided us, over half of low-income households are not seniors. This is a deep-rooted problem in this community. We also see, if we look at the rebates, and if you're kind of aligning it with an average home in certain areas where you have a higher concentration of lower-income residents, $200 or $500 is a lot of money for those individuals. And I think it's something that we should be willing to support as a community as a whole. And as per Councillor Stadnichuk's points, low-income cutoff and this measurement tool does account for a variety of factors, including family size, et cetera. Right? Is it a perfect number? No, everybody's somehow going to be above or below this figure. Councillor Bresciani had also talked about people who are essentially house poor. They've leveraged themselves to the hilt. They own a $600,000 home in an area they can't actually afford, and they're spending probably more than 30% of their income on that house. That's a very different set of decisions that led someone to that house in that neighborhood. And they might not be low income. The low income measurement tool that we have is imperfect, but I think it achieves a number of policy objectives. And I think as we come out of COVID, whenever that is, maybe 2030, I think we need to be prepared for the fact that income distribution is going to be incredibly uneven in this community. Inequality is getting worse, and people have been negatively affected by it, and I don't think not that everybody's going to recover in the same way. One of the assumptions here is that there's 100% uptake. That's not always the case, but I think administration has provided us with the rationale that rebates would likely solicit more interest than just the deferral. The final point is one that I hear all the time at council. It's not our jurisdiction. Social assistance, income support is someone else's problem. It's not. It is our responsibility when we identify poverty, homelessness, and housing precarity in this community. We already spend money through grants and other support structures to help the marginalized and to help communities that actually advocate for them. This is consistent with what we already do. This is also consistent with other jurisdictions. We've seen it in the environmental scan. So there's nothing out of the ordinary with this approach. And I think we'd be a better community if, at least as a council, we demonstrated this as a need, and that the actual cost overall for the community spread out over thousands of households is actually warranted. So that's why I'm going to advance this. I think it's actually more fair and will have a greater impact than just isolating it to a particular demographic that is less likely to experience, in terms of numbers, housing insecurity in Regina.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens. We have a speaking. Okay. Mayor Masters, go ahead.
I have a report that the City of Calgary did for 2019 residential property taxes utility charges surveys that has Regina in amongst 12 other Canadian cities in terms of comparative property tax levies on representative homing structures. When we compare ourselves with these others, and of the 13, 10 of them are under the population of 900,000. Representative bungalow homes property tax levies in 2019, Regina ranked 4th among these 13 in terms of affordability, lower numbers. When this same analysis was done on a 2-story house for these cities, the City of Regina ranked 9th. It is more expensive from a property tax perspective to live in a more expensive home. So the assumptions that there's a different set of decisions relative to housing, I just fundamentally disagree with, outside of the seniors motion that and individuals with disabilities that Councillor Bresciani presented. Relative to option 2, I won't agree to this type of, I think it's an absolute mistake to invest more time in this without a broader actual valid survey results. Like to go with, well, and I read it last night. The online questionnaire posted to be heard is a public engagement tool designed to provide Regina residents an opportunity to share their opinions. It is not a statistically valid survey conducted with a random selection of respondents. So without proper survey results of a broader categories of the citizens of Regina, I think undertaking this kind of profound shift in taxation is a mistake on behalf of elected officials, given the principles of taxation in the city that the report so aptly outlines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Bresciani?
Thank you very much. So I want to just start with the fact that we have committed to affordable housing for low-income families, to homelessness. We've given $1 million to start. And I'd just like to ask administration, like we have in this last, I'm going to say 2 years, I'd like to know the dollars that we have invested for affordable housing, for low-income housing, and we've got a community wellness committee. We are absolutely, our heart is in it, and not just our heart, but our dollars are in it as well. Can I just get what we have given towards affordable housing and low-income housing? Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So we have our housing incentive program worth 2.5 million for capital, and so that's been fully allocated, and then we'll be moving over $1 million to the supportive housing, and then we give tax exemptions also, and I just don't have that number. I'm not sure if Ms. Bryden has that number available on the tax exemption side, but it is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And sorry, I just don't have the numbers with me, but over a 10-year period, we have given significant amount of dollars between the capital grants that we give, in addition to the tax incentives we have given. I don't have those tax incentives.
That's fine. Thank you, through the chair. So again, when we look at the dollars, it's a wellness, over $3 million. And I think that at the end of the day, when this survey, if we want to talk about engaging residents, was done very, very poorly. I will publicly say that. The survey, I had many, many complaints about this. And we only touched the surface, not even, we're talking, we have 265,000 residents, and not even 3,000 residents responded. So I don't think we actually got the response or the information. I cannot make a decision on that type of feedback. So I cannot support this. There's another piece that I think here is vitally important, and I think that there's something called home ownership, and I don't know when does it end. And I think that yes, we've got grants, we've got dollars there for to get into a home, to have an affordable home, to get in there. But the piece of this is I don't want to set anybody up to fail either. So we offer a rebate. What's after the rebate? It's no different than you offer someone a home and you say, okay, get into the home, then they can't afford the home. That's really setting people up to fail. There's things that come with owning a home, and that means paying the bills. That means utility included, water, garbage. We don't, at the end of the day, it's expensive to live in a home. Yes, it is. But we all know the cost of living in a home. But as we can see it from Mayor Masters, when we see the comparison to other cities, right? I said, I think at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we are doing our due diligence, but when people go into new homes or into homes, they understand the cost of a home and what it costs maintaining your yard. So I think we're already doing, we've talked about it, we've heard about it, so we're already doing, I believe, with the programs and the incentives that we have. And like I said, it's over $3 million that we've done already, and it's probably more than that, but we don't have the numbers. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
I just want to kind of add a little bit to this. In order to be a homeowner, you have to save 5% for down payment. So on an average house in Regina of a lower income person, it's around $150,000. You have to save $15,000 plus closing costs, so about $18,500 to even step foot into a home. If you can do that on a low income, then I think you're doing pretty darn good. Once you get into that home, then you're saying, I can't afford this home. Well, the bank's already done their due diligence by doing your total debt ratio. Things have already been put in place. You've learned how to save your money. You've learned how to do things. The reason why I don't support this is when I was a low income, people I know that were low income, we just couldn't buy a home. We just couldn't afford to buy a home, and that's all there was to it. Once we got to a little bit higher of an income, then we could afford a home. Once you get into that home and you lose your job or your hours cut back or something, I had the potential to go out and work another job. I could work at McDonald's, they're always hiring. I could work at Tim Hortons, I could work at Walmart. I have that potential to do that. We all have that potential to do that, unless you're a senior or a person with a disability. And I know we've all lived with people with disabilities. They don't have the option to just walk into Walmart and get a job because there's a lot of things around there, barriers that they face. Seniors face barriers. They have put their hours in, they have put their work in, they have done their due diligence and done what they needed to do. At least them. At 75 years old, I don't think a senior should have to be still working to pay for taxes. To defer them, and yes, I don't support this as much as I have the utmost respect for people with lower income. They still have the potential to make more money. So for that reason, no, I don't support this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hawkins, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I too am in opposition to this. I just make the following points. We have very little information here on which to go on. We have no real information or good information on uptake. That's point one. Point two, I believe that a better way to help low-income people is to target that help. And that's what we do in the various programs in the city that we have. We target to low-income people that we know that need a specific kind of help. And it seems to me that's a better approach, and that is not the approach that's being taken here. My third point is it relates to the lack of information. We know that this is a very costly motion. It would cost, it would equate to 0.4 to 0.7% mill rate increase. I just don't think that that's something that we can do with this kind of program. For example, what about the next level up? You've got low income, and then you've got the next level up, and we're going to charge them 0.4 to 0.7 increase in their mill rate, and they might not be able to bear that. So this seems to me to be a program that lacks structure, is not targeted, and is very costly. And for those reasons, I'll oppose it.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor LeBlanc, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll support the proposed amendment. One thing I think which is relevant that hasn't been mentioned yet is that in Saskatchewan and Regina, someone working minimum wage full-time who has one kid could still fall under a low-income cutoff and qualify. So these aren't folks who are refusing to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. These are folks who lack bootstraps. And so I think it's well worth supporting this motion. Just a brief comment to the suggestion that sort of our council has done enough to support these folks. I would suggest that's not obvious when you look at the lineups at the community fridges in the core areas. Folks are struggling. That food disappears as soon as it's put in there, at least everything but the lentils does. And I think what that demonstrates is we need to do more, and we're capable of doing more. As Andrew said, the $200 or $500 makes a big difference. That could be school supplies for a kid or another month or two of groceries. So I'll support this because I think all folks deserve dignity, and even if you think only working folks do, a lot of them fall into this, and we have a lot of those in my ward and in all of our wards. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? Andrew, you want to close? Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Appreciate the feedback. Just a couple points for clarification. Survey results. I'll wager that the real dispute here isn't the outcome or the process, it's the outcome, which is support for this. You actually, if you wanted a representative survey, you'd spend about $30,000. You'd actually have fewer responses. Yes, they'd be representative. Let's be honest, you just didn't like the outcome, which is actual support of this kind of policy, which I was quite struck by. Is this a massive shift in how we deal with taxes? Absolutely not. Provided a massive amount of leniency to airports, multi-billion-dollar corporations, museums, and others. It's actually pretty consistent. I think it's just targeted to low-income people for the first time. And we actually spend less on this than we might otherwise spend on far wealthier clients and property owners in the city, including Harvard and Boardwalk and others. So we actually have more policies in place to support large corporations than we do low-income people. So there is a consistency here. In terms of the information, probably one of the most in-depth reports I've ever seen come from administration. We have a costing, and the whole request here is that the motion would then lead to a report with all that information. I have to assume that everybody has read it, and they can see the costing, and that the top-end amount is $1.33 a month in terms of how much this might actually cost. So there's plenty of information. Final point, I think it's important to be sensitive to how low-income lives work. It's not you start off at low income, you buy a house, and it's a miracle. People fall in and out of poverty all the time. This could be something people use one year, not the next. Happens all the time, and in fact, the data is suggesting to Regina, things are getting worse, and you'll have some people who lived a middle-class life that now live in low income. This could be something that benefits them for a year or two, but it's very fluid, and I think we're seeing the matters getting worse, and this is the least I think we could do. And it does demonstrate a commitment to this issue, and it is consistent with what we've offered very wealthy corporations in this community. So I'm pleased that they came forward with this. I'm looking forward to council's support.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. With respect to Councillor Stevens' motion, I'll begin with him, please. Councillor Stevens, I'm sorry, I'll begin with you,
yes.
please. Councillor Bresciani.
Opposed.
Councillor LeBlanc.
In favor.
Councillor Shaw.
Opposed.
Councillor Zahidniak.
In favor.
Councillor Stadnichuk.
In favor.
Councillor Hawkins.
Opposed.
Mayor Masters.
Opposed.
Councillor Findura.
Opposed.
The motion is defeated 4-5. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.
Now you got resolution for private session.
Okay, so can I get someone to move a resolution for private session? Councillor LeBlanc. Anyone opposes? Do we want any time to just kind of reshuffle things? 5 minutes and then we'll start? Okay. Yes, we did. Yeah, we tabled 63 and we moved the 61 to council. So we're done. Okay. Motion for recess for 5 minutes. Anyone? Okay, Councillor Stevens. Anyone opposes? I see none. Okay. 5 minutes.